I thought about a number of different titles for this video. Titles like Stardew Valley is a bad game, but I understand why others enjoy it, or some other such clickbait. But in the end, I think what I can say about it is that Stardew Valley is a good game, but that good game part has a couple of asterisks next to it. First, some background about me. I am by no means a Stardew Valley expert. I've only been playing the game since the 1.6 update, and I've had no prior experience with it before then. So anything that was different prior to the latest update, I won't be talking about since I don't have a reference point for it. I streamed the game for about 6 hours, then stopped, started over, thinking that I'd gotten a better hand on what was going on. Then I played the game for about 60 hours without any mods, so vanilla Stardew Valley, and then restarted after getting to Day 10 of spring in year 2, and did another run, this time with mods, and played for another 40 plus so hours. You can see here on Steam that my total playtime is 125, almost 126 hours total. And I think while I haven't done everything in the game, I have a pretty good grasp on the fundamentals and have done most of the content in it. If you're curious, I did an initial 6-hour stream of the game, and here were my thoughts on it after those first 6 hours, although they were pretty undeveloped at the time since I hadn't seen most of the game's content. So I think my main two problems with the game right now are, one, quality of life issues, where it feels like you don't have enough movement speed. I feel like I'm constantly too low on money to do anything. I'm constantly too low on energy to do what I want to do. I feel like all of my tools are too basic to do what I want to do. I feel like I haven't made any progress with any of the townspeople in developing their storylines. I feel like I don't really know any of the townspeople that well. I think if it does actually take you this long to get to efficient abilities and output, that's too long. Being almost 6 hours in the game and feeling like I'm still at the beginning just feels way too long. There's nothing really exciting happening. The combat against enemies is very basic and unexciting. A lot of time is spent walking or just mining resources, or cutting down trees for resources. I don't feel like the stories with the characters, at least as far as scratching the surface of them goes, is anything extremely compelling. So yeah, those were my thoughts after playing the first 6 hours of the game. Now, they haven't really changed after playing 125 hours of the game, and all the problems I had with it then continued to be problems, and in fact kind of got worse as the game went along. Now, I'm by no means a Stardew Valley expert, and in fact, there are entire channels built around Stardew Valley content. For example, this is Salments. This is one of the many YouTubers I looked at when I was looking for Stardew Valley guides and videos on various things in the game. I liked him the best out of all of the ones I found, and as you can see, he's got an absolute ton of videos all about Stardew Valley, so I'm definitely not as experienced as this. I haven't gotten every single thing in the game, I haven't done every single activity, but I do think I have a fairly good handle on the game systems, all of the content that you can do in the game, and that's how I'm going to be approaching it. So with that said, I hope that this video can be accessible to people both who are new to Stardew Valley and haven't played it at all, and to veterans who can maybe understand where I'm coming from with my various praise and complaints about the game. So obviously this video is going to be very long. I'm not sure exactly how long as I'm recording this, but quite long. So a quick synopsis of my overall opinions if you don't want to stick around and watch every single little thing that I have to go over, which is that my thoughts on the game are that this is a cozy game in the same vein as games like Minecraft or Animal Crossing, and if you like those games, you'll probably like Stardew Valley as well. But at the same time, it's also a game that has a lot of grinding in it and a lot of quality of life problems. So for people who don't like doing similar kind of repetitive tasks over and over and over, and who want more complicated gameplay systems than what Stardew Valley has to offer, or are more interested in more action-oriented, exciting, in quotes, games, things like Shadow of the Colossus, shooters, that kind of stuff, Stardew Valley definitely doesn't have anything like that. I think exciting is the exact antithesis of what this game is. So the basic premise of Stardew Valley is that your main character is a soulless drone office worker in some blank, expressionless mega corporation, in this case Joja Corp, who's just working in a cubicle day after day. Your grandfather dies and leaves you his farm as an inheritance, so with no real other prospects in life and nothing really going for you, you pack up your bags and you head out to Stardew Valley, a small little town in the countryside, to become a farmer. When you arrive, the farm is just an absolute wreck. It's an overgrown, dilapidated area filled with stones and bushes and logs that have just overgrown the entire area, with your grandfather not having done any upkeep on the place. So the first order of business is going to be clearing the land and setting up a farm. To be clear though, farming isn't the only thing you're going to be doing in the game, and while there are many activities that you can participate in, the main ones are going to be farming, of course. There's also ranching later on, taking care of your animals and getting animal product. Fishing, which is a surprisingly large portion of the game. Mining for various ores and other materials, which strangely enough includes a combat portion against relatively simplistic enemies. And then, of course, the social aspect of the game, giving gifts to villagers, getting to know people, watching cutscenes, and seeing the characters' storylines advance, with romance plots available as well. So first, let's talk farming. You're going to have to plant crops, as you can see here, by tilling up the soil using your hoe, then planting the crops, and you've got to make sure that your crops stay watered, either with the watering can or by putting sprinklers around. You'll also need scarecrows to prevent crows from eating your crops. This is really the first activity that you're going to be involved in, and the main thing that you're going to be doing, aside from all of the other activities, of course, but this, I would say, is the primary crux of the game. There are various different crops that you can buy. They take a different amount of money to buy, they yield a different amount of money when sold, and they take a different amount of time to actually grow. So for example, parsnips only take 4 days to grow, whereas cauliflower take 12 days to grow, but parsnips sell for less, cauliflower sells for more, and of course, the starting price to buy the different seeds is more or less depending on the yield of the crop. You can buy your crops from Pierre's in town or the Joja Mart, which is further away. When you want to sell your crops, you can either sell them directly to Pierre, or you can sell your items in the shipping bin, where you just take anything that's in your inventory and put it in the shipping bin, which initially starts out right next to your farm. And you can sell anything here, or at least almost anything, not just crops. The only downside is that you have to wait a day for the shipping bin to have all of its items removed from it and shipped out. So if you need the money immediately, you'll have to make a trip to Pierre's, and the same is true for all of your other items. If you've got ores or anything like that, you're gonna have to visit Clint the blacksmith. If you want to sell fish, you're gonna have to visit Willie the fisherman, etc. Next up is fishing, which you have the fishing rod for. With any body of water, you can cast your fishing line, send it out, and then you wait for your fish to bite. Sometimes you'll snag some useless junk from the sea or something that isn't a fish, in this case, sea jelly. Other times you hit a fish, which brings up the fishing reel minigame. You have a tiny green bar that surrounds the fish, and you need to keep the fish in that bar for the entire time in order to get the fish. Some fish are, of course, easier to catch than others, but it never really gets any more complicated than this. There's a little bit more in that you can add bait to your fishing line or some bobbers, but for the most part, this is going to be fishing for the entire game. And as a result, a lot of people find fishing to be the least interesting activity in the game, and in fact, there are mods that either entirely remove fishing or just make it an auto-win situation. Next up is the mines. So the mines is an area where you can go down. Initially, you'll go down through this ladder, and then you'll need your pickaxe to go through breaking rocks in order to find the down staircase in order to descend levels. You can break rocks for stone, you can find gems, you can find geodes, and there are enemies to fight with a weapon of your choice. Enemies also yield their own things like bug meat and other things like that. Every 5 levels, you'll also get another elevator shortcut down. So basically, you're trying to make it 5 levels down at a time, at which point you can access the elevator, and then you can access any floor that you've been to for a total of 120 floors, at least in this main mine area, although there are other mining areas that you can go to later. Then there's the social aspect of going around town talking to the various villagers and seeing what they have to say. You have relationships with all of the villagers, and initially all of these heart scores start at 0. You'll have to bring them up over time, usually by giving them gifts and talking with them, but there are also other special events that you can have to increase the hearts without giving them gifts, but for the most part, it's going to be going around and handing them gifts. For example, if a villager wants, say, a fish, and you get a fish for them, you can give them a fish as a gift, but their villagers have a bunch of different things that they like and don't like, and every villager is different. Last but not least, there's a few mini games that you can play, some arcade games. There is Journey of the Prayer King, which is a tiny little shooter game like this. And there's Junimo Kart, which is a little kart mini game similar to those kart levels in Donkey Kong Country. And finally, there's ranching. So something that you'll probably do later on after all of those activities is building buildings for your various farm animals, getting those farm animals, and then you'll need to pet the farm animals, make sure they're fed with either grass outside or hay inside, which you can get from cutting down grass with your scythe. And then those animals will have, of course, animal byproducts. In the case of things like chickens and ducks, they can produce eggs, which you can then turn into mayonnaise with a mayonnaise machine. And in the case of cows, goats, and pigs, you're going to have obviously things like milk. You'll have sheep that produce wool. Pigs will dig up truffles. And you can turn all of that into things like cheese, cloth, and truffle oil. Anything building related like coops and barns is going to be obtained from Robin the Carpenter, who can upgrade your house, construct additional farm buildings, things like coops, barns, silos to keep hay, and then some other buildings that are more niche like mills, which wheat, beets, and rice, etc. You can make a shed to give yourself more space on your property to do other things, fish ponds so that you can cultivate your own fish, a stable for a horse, and this is Robin, who's going to be the primary source for all of your carpentry needs. Although it usually takes multiple days for her to finish carpentry on any one project, which means that you can't do another project until she's finished up. Another frequent stop for you is going to be Clint the Blacksmith on the east side of town. This is going to be where you can shop for ores if you want to buy ores straight up instead of the mine, although I never did. This is also where you upgrade your tools if you haven't upgraded them yet. Tools start at the default level and can be upgraded with copper, then iron, gold, and eventually iridium. And this is also where you're going to process your geodes that you find in the mines. Our last stop for important NPCs is going to be Marnie's Ranch. So here's Marnie, and this is where you're going to buy all of your livestock-related stuff. So things like purchasing animals for your various coops and barns, and buying supplies, things like hay, heaters so that your animals stay warm inside, especially during winter, shears to shear sheep, etc. One more place and character worth mentioning is the Adventurers Guild. This is where you can turn in quests for slaying monsters, as well as go and buy weapons. If you have like maybe not so good weapon, you can buy potentially more powerful weapons. You can buy armor. Although again, I usually found this kind of stuff while I was just in the mines anyway and didn't have to buy any of this stuff straight up. And with that said, that is pretty much the extent of the content in the game, the main things you're going to be doing. So let's talk about what makes those things good and bad. As far as your farm goes, it's pretty straightforward. Plant crops, water them, wait for them to grow, eventually harvest them, and then use those crops to sell off, to buy more seeds, to plant, to make more crops, etc. And most of the stuff in the game is going to be on that sort of looping schedule. When it comes to your animals, you're going to be petting the animals to make them happy, milking your cows, shearing your sheep, letting you get more resources from the animals to turn in for more money when you sell them, to get more animals, to upgrade your barns and coops, to get more things, etc. The mines are divided into different levels depending on where you're at. So levels 1 through 39 are the what I'll call copper area. This is where you're going to find your lower level enemies and copper ore. Then 40 through 80 is roughly the iron area, where you start to get more of these frozen places with more powerful enemies. You start to get more powerful slimes. You start to get other kinds of enemies that can attack you, bats, ghosts, etc. And then when you reach level 80 plus, this is where you get to the gold or lava-based areas, where you start to get more dangerous enemies and gold ore. If you get hit by an enemy, you take damage, and you can heal yourself using mostly any food item or special elixirs. Items will also give you back not just food, but also energy, which you're capped at for various activities throughout the day. So however much mining and farming and whatever else that you're doing, a lot of stuff takes energy, and you're going to drain this energy bar as the day goes on. And while I have gotten some energy upgrades since the beginning of the game, this usually starts at about, I believe it's 240 or so energy, and then can get a little bit stronger as the game goes along and you find rare star fruits that can allow you to upgrade your energy bar. Then, of course, there's the fishing minigame, and as I've said, you'll want to get bait and bobbers of various kinds in order to upgrade your fishing rod. And regardless, all of these activities, as you do them more and more, will increase your skills. So you initially have 0 in all of these categories: farming, mining, foraging for wild berries and other things that you can find on plants and trees, fishing, and combat. And as you participate in these activities, you level up. These become more efficient and more powerful as the game goes along, and you unlock special abilities. So for example, Tiller, once you've done enough farming, you usually get a choice between one of two professions at levels 5 and 10. So for level 5 here, I chose the Tiller. Crops are worth 10% more. For mining, +1 ore per vein, and you get various things like that. But as far as fishing goes, as I said, it never really gets more complicated than making sure that your green line here is in the path of the fish, which you do by pressing one single button. And although this may look easy now, the green bar that reels in the fish initially starts much smaller, and it does take a little bit just to get used to it. Also, there are various fish that are much more difficult to catch than the one I'm catching right now. My main problem with all of this is that these activities are just so damn tedious and boring, especially without mods. Between harvesting crops, planting new crops, watering each of your crops every day, cutting down trees, fishing, mining, and just walking around town and gifting NPCs. It takes goddamn forever to do anything, including just getting around, and you're constantly running out of the necessary energy that you need to do things during the day, or once you get your energy up to a sufficient amount, just time in the day to do what you want to get done. Also money in order to buy things. In fact, it feels like you're constantly unable to finish what you want to finish or buy the things that you want to buy, especially in the early game when you're just starting off. I think a good demonstration of this is going to be just how long it takes to do things with base weapons and tools, base skill levels, so when your skill levels are at the minimum versus at the maximum, and, you know, tools, regular base tools versus iridium level tools, and increased animation speed, walking speed, fishing, etc. With that out of the way, let's do a side-by-side showing how much it is. So this is chopping down trees with a base level tool and 0 level skill versus top level skill and an iridium tool. So here's chopping down a tree with a base level axe and 0 skill versus an iridium axe, 10 level skill, and increased animation speeds that have been sped up through modding. And here's breaking stones with a regular pickaxe, no skill level, and no mods, versus an iridium level pickaxe, level 10 mining, and mods that increase animation speeds. Even just walking anywhere takes forever. Here's walking to Pierre's shop from your farm with normal walking speed in the base game versus an increased walking speed that has been sped up through mods. Base level unmodded combat isn't much better either. The amount of time it takes to do anything in this game is just agony. In vanilla mode, unmodded, it just takes way too long to get anything you actually want to get done. Whereas if you mod the game, speed up animations, and implement various quality of life improvements, the game gets a lot better. It feels similar to me like how I described Subnautica, where that game was a pretty good game but had significant quality of life problems specifically related to the inventory. And I now firmly believe that the only real way to play Subnautica is by modding it to expand the inventory substantially. Stardew Valley has similar problems, which is why I put that asterisk next to the "it's a good game" or "I recommend playing it," because the game gets a lot better once you've modded it to improve all of those problems, and I wish that my first playthrough of the game had been a modded one. Speaking of the inventory, Stardew Valley has a pretty limited inventory to start with. Initially, you only have spaces 1 through 12 available to you and nothing else, and while you can buy some backpack upgrades at Pierre's, you don't get those until a little bit later, and they're quite expensive. I would say that the inventory only really gets up to a usable amount once you get the second backpack upgrade that unlocks the third row. And even then, you're still often limited by space later in the game. In this case, I've modded the game to give myself yet another row of inventory space, and yet even then, I still think that there's really no reason why the game should limit your inventory space. It doesn't really make things interesting, more just so tedious, as you have to constantly run back to your farm, drop off everything in chests, then go out again. Or if you're in the field and you don't have the time to get back to your farm, you have to start just junking stuff into the trash can for pennies on the dollar. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but the traveling merchant is just insane in the game, where a lot of the economy of the game doesn't make any sense. So some things do make sense. Like, okay, you go to Pierre's shop. If you go up, it'll be like, okay, here's the seeds. All right, this makes sense. 20 for parsnips, 80 for cauliflower. Okay, this all makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is the cosmetic items. So in a game like Subnautica, for example, or Minecraft, you'll have decorating and having the cosmetic items is a part of the game, right? And usually those games will even have creative modes, like Subnautica, Minecraft. There will be creative modes where you are invincible and you can just spawn in any item you want. And the appeal for those modes is more about like, I just want to explore and see the different areas, and I want to decorate my base or decorate my house, and I don't want to have to gather a bunch of resources for that. But Stardew Valley doesn't have any sort of creative mode outside of modding and cheating in. So to me, it makes no sense for the cosmetic items to be this expensive. And there's so many more than this. So many, like basically every shop will usually have some amount of cosmetic items. And to me, it doesn't make any sense for cosmetic items to be this expensive. But on top of that, it's not just the cosmetic items, it's also the shopkeepers. So outside of the main shopkeepers like Clint, the blacksmith, and Pierre and whatnot, these other shopkeepers like the traveling merchant makes absolutely no sense. So the traveling merchant will sell you random items that don't have to do with whatever the season is, right? So it'll let you buy like out of season stuff. So like cranberries you can't grow, not spring, which we're in right now. So the traveling merchant can be useful when you want to buy something that's out of season, for example, like you're missing a fish and you don't want to have to go fish for it. But the prices make absolutely no sense. So for example, one time I went to the traveling merchant and she was selling one piece of coal for 1,000 gold. Coal, something that you can find in multiples easily in even the earliest levels of the mines. Or even if you wanted to buy coal, you can buy a coal from Clint for 250, which is also insane, but it's 1/4 of the price, as opposed to 1,000 from the traveling merchant. And just like the economy of the game outside of the primary shopkeepers makes no sense. Even Robin, I would argue, her carpentry is way too expensive for buildings. Now, before moving on, I will have to give credit where it's due. This is a game made by one single person. Eric Barone, aka Concerned Ape, made everything in the game, and a lot of it is quite nice. I would say the best aspect of the game is the music, which is very good, and I recommend listening to the soundtrack. There's 100 songs roughly as of the 1.6 update, and many of them are very good. I do think that the spring and summer songs are better, and the quality does drop off a little bit once you get to autumn and winter, but it still remains good the entire time. The graphics are also quite nice, as you can tell, and I am a sucker for good pixel graphics. The UI in the game is also very well managed. You have a nice laid out inventory system here with tabs that let you pick each single thing that you need to look at, and you can easily swap between them without much cumbersome. You, of course, have your inventory tab, then you've got your skills tab that shows all of your current skills, as well as some other information like how far you've upgraded your house, how many community center bundles you've finished, your social tab, which shows all of the NPCs in the game, whether you've given them a gift today, whether you've spoken to them today, how many hearts you have with them, etc. Although I do wish there was a way to sort this by name, by hearts, etc., where really it'll just show you all of the NPCs by hearts, and then if they have the same amount of hearts, I don't know how it decides what order to show you those in. The map, of course, which will show a map of the area. You've got your crafting tab, which shows everything that you can craft and what it takes to craft those things. Your animals, all of your current animals, how much they've been pet today, what their current heart rating is, as higher hearts will make them produce better quality goods. Your special tab, which shows all of these special abilities that you've unlocked, such as whether you've obtained the Skull Key, if you have the Run Faster ability from the Way of the Wind book, etc. Your collection tab, which shows how many items and what specific items you've shipped in the shipping container, also broken down by the type of items, so farm and foraging, fish, artifacts, minerals, cooking, etc. This also shows where you have letters, achievements, and secret notes that you unlock later on. Obviously, your options menu, with which you can change various things in the game, audio, etc. Not only was Stardew Valley developed by only one single person, but it's also pretty cheap for how much content there is. As of this video's recording, it's on sale, but at least normally you can get the game for $15, and for how much content is in the game, remember, I've played the game for 127 hours at this point, that is quite the amount of content for how much you're paying for it. But with all that said, there are significant problems in the game, which I think are best gone over by the specific tasks that you're doing. The social aspect of the game is an absolute nightmare, so let's go through it. Throughout the town, you'll meet, of course, various NPCs that you can interact with and talk to, hear about their day, thoughts on the town, thoughts on other people, etc. In order to progress in these characters' storylines, just talking to them or living out the year is not enough. You have to give them gifts, which you don't know what the villagers like and what they don't like. And everybody likes and dislikes different things. And while you can unlock various ways of figuring that out, for example, some secret notes may tell you what villagers like and don't like. Talking to NPCs, sometimes they'll tell you what villagers like and don't like. For the most part, it's trial and error as you give them things, hoping that those things will be liked items, and then hoping that they're not disliked items, which will reduce your friendship. In practice, what this actually means is that you're just going to open up the wiki and look that over. Here's the Stardew Valley wiki list of all gifts, and it shows universally liked gifts, most of which are quite rare. The only one that's even remotely usable is the rabbit's foot that you can get from rabbits on your coops. And then here's all of the NPCs and what they like and dislike, and for the most part, this stuff is usually pretty hard to get. The love, like, neutral, dislike, and hate also affect how much the likability goes up, and it takes more than one loved gift to increase a character by even 1 heart. As you can see, your NPCs are all listed in a list here, and it shows how many hearts you have with them. Now, I'm fairly far along in this particular playthrough, but all the NPCs normally start at 0 hearts. They will show a cutscene specific to that NPC when they get to a specific heart rating and you go to a specific location. So let's say I've got Pierre and he's at 4 hearts and I go to Pierre's shop, maybe there will be a cutscene with Pierre. So this is the way that you advance these character storylines outside of just talking to them. However, for the full extent of that, this takes an incredibly long time. So every character is given a specific number of friendship points, I'll put in quotes, and those points are increased whenever you gift them a specific thing that they like, love, etc. Going onto the gifts page and looking at every single character, which means either having a second monitor with this wiki page open at all times in order to look this stuff up, at which point are you really even playing the game, or if you don't have a second monitor, flipping back and forth between the game and this wiki page. And a lot of the gifts are very difficult to get. So the loved gifts might be something easy enough, like hot peppers. If you planted enough hot pepper plants in the summer, you can easily get enough hot peppers for Shane. Or amethysts for Abigail. You can find a fair number of amethysts while mining. But sometimes it's something more difficult than that. So for example, if I want to romance Leah, and that is the character that I wanted to romance, then you either have to get one of very specific cooked items, or you have to have pigs to dig up truffles, or you have to have goats to make goat cheese, or you have to be able to make wine, all of which are more difficult items to get than normal, especially as a newbie who doesn't know what they're doing. And this is true for many of the characters where they have items that are just straight up not really reliable to be able to get, either cheaply or just at all. Each gift falls into the either loved, liked, neutral, disliked, or hated categories, and really loved gifts are the only ones worth giving because everything else takes too long. Hell, even loved gifts take too long to really advance the character's hearts. So anything less than that is terrible, except for their birthdays. When you give a loved gift on a birthday, it increases the multiplier of how many points you get for that gift. And you can sometimes get 4 hearts at a time by giving a character a gift that they love on their birthday, but outside of that, it's really not worth it most of the time. However, their birthday only comes around once a year, and so if you're going to advance any of these characters' storylines, that's going to mean piling up gifts to give to all of them. So just as an example, here are Elliot's loved gifts, amongst which Basically, none of them are quite viable to have a substantial amount of or be able to get commonly, which means that you're going to have to move down to the next most like, which is most fruit, squid, if you can get a bunch of squid at Squid Fest, etc. Now, some of them have loved gifts that are more easily accessible than others, but most of them don't, meaning that you have to move down a tier. And even amongst the loved gifts, it takes a very long time gifting the gifts to these NPCs over and over and over to raise them even 1 heart at a time. In fact, NPCs don't go up on hearts until about somewhere around 200 point increases, whereas you can see love is only plus 80 input. What this means in practice is that the only time that you can really get substantially more hearts on an NPC is when you give them a gift, specifically a loved gift on their birthday, which has a multiplying effect on it. But outside of that, you're mostly going to be relegated to giving them loved and a lot of times liked gifts 1 at a time outside of their birthday, which increases it very, very slowly. In fact, it could take you months of giving gifts to these NPCs in order to actually raise their hearts to a level that is going to increase. All right, so let's talk about the tedium of actually finishing all of these various tasks. So, if you bring up the calendar, you can see that there's 28 days in the month. The game is broken into 4 months: spring, summer, fall, winter. And every month has 28 days in it, and every day is broken into 10-minute increments from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. at night. The game ticks up in 10-minute increments. However, those 10 minutes are not 10 real-life minutes, they're 10 in-game minutes. What this means is that in practice, a day is actually approximately 12 to 13 minutes long. However, that's not exactly correct because the timer pauses whenever you're in a menu or digging through a chest or talking to an NPC in their store or outside. The timer will flash gray indicating that it's paused. So in practice, depending on how many NPCs you're talking to, or if you're digging through your inventory or futzing around in the menu, what this actually means is that the day is probably going to be more like 20 minutes at a time. Just walking around at a normal walking speed also takes a very long time on the map. And when you want to talk and gift to NPCs, this winds up being an incredibly arduous task. What this means in practice is that once you've got your farm set up and you've got a fair number of items going around and you don't have to worry about money as much as usual, going and finding every single one of your chests, then cross-checking the items that you have currently with the wiki to make sure that it's a loved gift for somebody in town, going to every single one and piling up those items into your inventory, then running into town like a Santa Claus and handing out gifts to all of the NPCs. And this increases their hearts very, very slowly. You're capped at only 2 gifts per week, meaning you can't give more gifts to someone even if you've got more than 2 of the item that they love. And even giving them 2 gifts per week that they love is not going to be enough to even increase them by 1 heart. So in practice, what this means is that even if you do this consistently throughout an entire year, you're still not going to have their hearts maxed out by the end of the year. I did this strategy of piling items into my inventory and then running out, cross-checking with the wiki, and then giving everyone gifts that they loved for months on end in my first playthrough, and by the end of the first year, I still had more than half of the NPCs not even at half the amount of hearts that I would need to see all of their cutscenes. Additionally, everybody has 10 hearts available, however, marriage candidates only have 8 hearts available, and if you want to see more, you have to start dating them. So what this means is, when you're dating one person, you can't date another person. So everybody that you decide not to date is going to be capped at 8 hearts, meaning you're never going to see the remaining cutscenes that you would get to see if you had them at 10 or more hearts, which means that you either have to date and then break up with every single marriageable character if you want to see all of their cutscenes, or more likely, just go to YouTube and look up somebody else playing the game who did romance them. Additionally, you need to talk to characters every single day or the friendship level starts to decay. Now, it doesn't decay that quickly, but the fact that it decays at all is just kind of ridiculous. So let's say you give somebody a gift early on, and then after a month, you don't really give them another gift or talk to them much because you're focused more on farming or going to the mines. Well, that friendship level is going to slowly decay, meaning you may as well not have even gifted them anything unless you were going to make it a habit of running out into town every single week, gifting everyone everything that you could. But additionally, this gets even worse because if you look at the map, characters are spread out all over the place, and although most of them can be found in the center of town and will congregate at places like the saloon at night, a lot of them either don't congregate ever or are spread out all over the place. If you want to become friends with the wizard, well, he's way the hell over here in the wizard's tower. Willie and Elliot are at the beach, and there's just a whole bunch of characters that are spread out all over the place. Additionally, characters all have different schedules, and the schedules have so many exceptions and changes depending on whether it's the character's birthday, what season it is, what time it is, etc., that it can be difficult to know where a character is at any given moment without, again, looking up the wiki. In particular, some characters have absolutely insane schedules that make them difficult to contact most of the time. A lot of characters also spend times indoors in their houses, and you can't go into a character's bedroom unless you're at least 2 hearts friendly with them, meaning that for a lot of characters like Sebastian, Leah, Elliot, characters that are far away and spend lots of time indoors, it can be a giant pain in the ass in order to try to actually become friends with them. Then there's also just the fact of how long it takes to get around everywhere. Remember, the normal walking speed is much slower than this in vanilla unmodded Stardew Valley. What this means in practice is that in order to just get around the map and try to give out gifts to every single character that you can find, it's going to take a long time. Go down to the Wizard's Tower, go over to Leah's cabin, go over to Marnie's, go over to the center of town and to each individual house and building in order to talk to everyone. Make sure to go up and talk to Robin and her family at the Carpentry Center. Make sure to go talk to the dwarf at the mines and to Marlin. On and on it goes. Even if I made it a priority to go and only try to gift the NPCs gifts that day, I didn't bother about planting new crops and harvesting them. I didn't care about going to the mines or fishing. I only got up, immediately went outside, grabbed all the items that I could, went into town and started talking to everybody and gifting them stuff. It would still often take all the way until 2 p.m. in order to finish all of that. Half the day gone just doing that. And you've got to do it twice a week because of the gift limit, because you don't want to go a week without giving both gifts to them, because otherwise you're out of those gifts that you could have given them otherwise. Remember, you want to progress these heart storylines. It's going to take a really, really long time to do so. Personally, rather than all of the arduous gift giving that takes so long to do, I would have rather that the stories progressed more naturally over the course of the game. So for example, in my original playthrough of 60 hours, I was more focused on just getting the farm up and running and making sure I had a steady stream of income rather than spending a bunch of time gifting to all of the NPCs. And as a result, by the time I actually did get around to trying to gift to all the NPCs all the way in fall, I was a lot less invested in and interested in gifting to them and seeing their storylines than if I had just been progressing naturally throughout the game. I think this is one area of the game that really shouldn't have been gamified and should have just progressed normally throughout the year as you got yourself ingratiated to the community, talked to people, and so on. Or if they wanted to make it a gamified system, what you could have done instead was have it be more difficult but more one-off quests in order to do it. So for example, one of the secret notes that you can find is by Leah, and she says, "My idea of a perfect dinner would be salad, goat cheese, truffle, and wine. For dessert, I'd need a poppy seed muffin. If someone gave me one of those things, I'd melt." So wouldn't a more interesting thing be that if you found and cooked all of these things for Leah, you could give them all to her and then she would just max out her friendship with you, rather than having to give gifts 2 at a time every single week for months on end. I think this would have made for a far more interesting system, whether it was a game or not, in terms of getting the villagers to be friends with you and romancing them. All right, so let's talk about the other things you're going to do. So the other big activities in the game are the museum and the community center. So first, let's go with the museum. So the museum/library, I suppose, is on the east side of town, and it's over here that you talk to Gunther and you set up various artifacts and gems that you find in order to complete the museum. This stuff is mostly found while you're mining in the mines, but you can find artifacts in other places. But again, it's mostly through mining. And as you can see here, I've already done a year of the game, and I'm still not even close to being done with all of the museum pieces. You can get copies of artifacts that you've already found, and where you find other artifacts is just baffling. I don't actually know where to find all of the artifacts that I'm missing. Occasionally, when you give Gunther artifacts, I'm not sure if it's based on the number of artifacts that you give, or only certain artifacts given will give you a reward from Gunther, which is usually something small. It's usually something, it's either cosmetic or it's some small little reward. Then there's the community center. So the community center is a building which is located in this part of town over here. And initially when you go inside, the building is a dilapidated wreck, and you have to solve or complete certain bundles in order to finish the community center. So the bundles will be groups of items that you need to give to the community center in order to restore it. So that could be certain crops, certain other items, basically every kind of item that you could think will eventually be used at some point. So fish, crops, forageable items, artisan goods like wine. And then in the case of the vault, just straight up money. You give over wood, stone, ores, all kinds of things. This thing takes an incredibly long amount of time in order to finish. In fact, in my first 60-hour playthrough, by the end of year 1, I still was nowhere even close to finishing the community center. The other option is to go with the Jojamart, which is basically the corporate grocery store in town, although the game is specifically setting up this situation where it's depicting Jojacorp as the bad guys. I mean, they're even the soulless corporation that your main character leaves at the beginning of the game to go become a farmer in Stardew Valley, so why would I go with them? Therefore, I can't comment on the Joja route because I never actually did it myself, but what it sounds like is that the Joja route is basically the same thing as completing the community center, but instead of having to go find very specific items, you just have to give them money. Regardless, when you do finish the community center, you get some cutscenes with the characters, but then you get this, which is a big empty community center that the villagers don't even really use much, other than maybe one day out of the week when everyone gathers here. But other than that, it's just a big empty community center and you really don't get anything for it, which was extremely disappointing to me once I actually finished the center. However, the more insidious thing that the community center does is all of the bundles in the community center are not initially unlocked. Some of them are unlocked, and completing certain bundles will unlock other bundles. What this means is you don't know what items you need in order to complete the community center, which means that you just decide to hoard everything because you don't know what you need to finish them. For example, one of the bundles requires that you have 5 of a particular gold star crop. And in my playthrough, I had already passed the month that you can grow that crop in, meaning I couldn't complete the bundle until an entire year went by and I got back around to, I believe it was fall again, in order to complete the bundle of that crop. And it's the same thing. There are certain fish that you can only catch in certain seasons, meaning that if you don't catch those fish in spring, let's say, and you need a fish that you can only catch in spring in order to finish the bundle, you're not going to be able to finish that bundle until you loop all the way around a year back to spring in order to go catch that fish again. Speaking of, it's a giant pain in the ass even knowing where you can find things. The game doesn't tell you where you can actually find certain fish, although sometimes it does, but sometimes you'll be told through an NPC telling you or a hint given over the TV, but for the most part, you're not told. Meaning it can be a gigantic pain in the ass trying to figure this stuff out, or in more likelihood, again, you'll just pull the wiki open and look up every single thing. And God forbid you miss it, and you switch over to, let's say, spring to summer, and you missed one of the spring fish, now you can't get it anymore. So again, hoard everything, make sure you don't sell stuff, because you don't know when you're going to need those things for a community bundle or some other thing that you're going to need. Over at Pierre's, there is a help wanted sign, which will occasionally come up with quests that you need to finish, and those quests may require specific items. In this case, this quest requires 5 anchovies, for example. If you don't have 5 anchovies, that means you gotta go fish them out. Down here, there's also another sign that's given that will give you longer quests to obtain. So most quests will only last about 2 days. You've got 2 days to finish them, and if you don't finish them in those 2 days, that's it, you're out. These ones will usually take a lot longer. It can be anywhere from like a week to the entire month in order to finish them. But again, if you don't got them, then you're just kind of screwed. What this means in practice is that you're basically incentivized to hoard everything, but you can't hoard everything, especially early on, because you need those items to sell to get more gold, to get more crops, and buy more tools, upgrade the tools that you have, etc. To me, this isn't interesting tension, it's more just an obnoxious pain in the ass, arduous chores, tedious, busy work to keep going. And that, unfortunately, is the biggest death knell of the game, which is that so many of the activities, even if they would be normally interesting on their own, become huge pains in the ass once you realize how long it's going to take and how much repetition is going to be involved in actually finishing them. In my initial playthrough, I never actually got any coops, barns, or any farm animals for the entire first year of the game, and that's because of the enormous expense that goes into this. Let's compare ranching to crops. So for crops, all you gotta do is head over to Pierre's or Jojamart, but Pierre's more likely. Buy your crops, buy your seeds, and then you come over here, till up the land, and plant all of your seeds, and that's it. As long as you make sure that the seeds remained watered, you'll eventually be able to harvest them and sell them at a profit. For farm animals, not only do the animals themselves cost money, but so do the buildings, and quite a lot of it. So let's head over to Robin's and look at the actual cost of making a building. So let's look at the most basic building that you have, a coop. 300 wood, 100 stone, and 4,000 gold. Now, the wood and stone are not really that big of a deal. In fact, you'll be cutting down a lot of trees and getting a bunch of stones early on, clearing out your farm, mining, etc. These two items here are not really that big of a deal. The bigger problem is the 4,000 gold, and the coop has multiple coop upgrades that you're going to buy later on. Same thing with a barn for your cows, goats, sheep, and pigs. 350 wood, 150 stone, 6,000 gold. These gold costs are a huge impediment to even getting started with ranching farm animals. It was such a big investment that I never bothered with it, because why would I spend the 6,000 gold on a barn, for example, when I can spend that 6,000 gold to get more crops, plant those crops, and have a relatively easy and faster return on investment than building this stuff. And remember, Robin takes multiple days to even build these buildings in the first place. So in order to invest in ranching, you've got to have the resources that you need, including the massive gold count, especially early in the game, in order to get these buildings. Wait multiple days for the buildings to be finished. Then you've got to go over to Marnie's place. So head over to Marnie's ranch, then purchase an animal, and they can be, again, expensive on their own. So only 800 gold for a chicken, but again, you're going to want like 4 chickens, because that's how many animals can sit in the basic coop. So multiply that by 4. And the other animals only get more expensive. So, 8,000 for a rabbit, 8,000 for a sheep. These are huge expenses for these animals, and you're not going to get a return on this investment until later. So wait for the building to get finished. Then you'll initially have an infant version of all of these animals, so they won't even be producing anything at first. So you'll have infant cows that can't produce milk, infant chickens that haven't matured enough to produce eggs yet. So you still have to wait for your return on investment, and it's only going to be possibly a week later, after you've already invested all of this stuff, that you can finally start harvesting from all of these animals and actually get a return on investment. And then the amazing return on investment you're going to get after that, oh, I can sell this egg for 190 gold. Only a tiny, tiny fraction of the initial investment that you've made on all of this. And so for my playthrough, I never bothered with making any of these coops or barns until after the first year, and that was just more as a curiosity once I'd gotten my farm up and running. You're also further set back after the first year, because once you're done with winter and you run back all the way to year 2 of spring, 1, the cost to buy things increases for some ungodly reason, so Clint and Robin will increase their prices for blacksmithing and carpentry. And 2, you're set back to the spring crops, which have a lower yield than the summer and fall crops, so your farm is going to be set back even further. Now let's just talk about the busy work involved in just playing the game. So normally you're going to start off the day, wake up, you're going to go over to your TV to make sure that there's, check the weather, check the fortune teller to see what the luck is for the day. If it's a particularly lucky day, you're going to want to go to the mines or fish in order to have that higher luck payoff so that you can get better ore, better fish, etc. If there's a queen of sauce or living on the land to give you information, you're going to want to do that. Then you're going to go out here, and if you've got any crops to plant, you're going to want to plant those crops. You're going to want to till the soil with your hoe if you're missing any of that. Any crops that need to be harvested, you're going to have to harvest those crops. Then you're probably going to have more crops than you need, so you're either going to want to dump those crops into chests or go over here to the shipping bin in order to ship them all. However, it's possible that you may not have that much money and you need the crops to get your money back so you can go buy more stuff. Remember, it takes multiple days for crops to finish. It takes so you're going to want to get those crops planted as fast as possible, which means rather than putting them in the shipping bin and waiting an entire day for the shipping bin to get picked up, you're going to want to run over to Pierre's in town immediately to sell those crops. And if you've got anything else to sell, like ore or gems from the mines or anything else, you're going to have to go to different shopkeepers. So you're going to have to visit Clint to sell off ores and gems, and you're going to have to go down to Willie's if you want to sell fish. It just makes it a giant pain in the ass. And remember, you're normally not walking this fast. You're walking probably even slower than this most of the time, which makes just getting around time consuming in itself. Also, remember, if you don't have sprinklers yet, which you don't get for quite some time, I think you need farming level 6 in order to unlock even just regular quality sprinklers. You're going to have to water all of these crops, and you're probably going to have more crops than you have water in a single watering can, which means going over, finding a water source, refilling the watering can, then watering again, and you may have to do that multiple times depending on how many crops you have. If you've got farm animals, it's also going to mean visiting the farm animals and petting every single individual farm animal to make sure they're pet. If you've got cows to milk, you're going to have to milk those. If you've got sheep to shear, you're going to have to shear those. If you've got mayonnaise machines to create mayonnaise, you're going to have to dump eggs into the mayonnaise machines. If you've got cheese or truffle or wool, you're going to have to put them in the looms or oilers or cheese makers in order to get that. If you've got anything else that you need to do, such as furnaces to smelt ore, you're going to want to do that. If these are finished, you're going to want to have a chest nearby that you can dump the ore into. Same with a charcoal kiln for turning wood into coal. If you have beehives, you're going to want to harvest the honey out of the beehives and then put those in a chest or ship them. The bait machines may have finished producing bait. You're going to want to take the bait out of the bait machines. There's so much shit to do. At a certain point, I think it's sometime in spring, maybe halfway through, you unlock this cave, which has, depending on your choice, either mushrooms or bats. Run in here, grab all the mushrooms, put those in a chest. If you've got fruit trees, which take an entire season to grow, you're going to want to harvest all of the fruit from the fruit trees. Sell those off or put those in a chest to make sure that you've got a necessary supply. If you've got jars or kegs or casks that are producing wine or bottled or pickled items, you're going to want to go up to every single one of those, drop items into those, pick any up that have matured from here. It's such a gigantic pain in the ass to do anything in the game. You could be easily done with half the day before you even finish all of your daily tasks. One of the other problems that occurs in the game in terms of trying to gift everyone everything is that a lot of the stores and various houses have certain times that they're open and closed, and while most of them will generally follow the formula of opening at 9 a.m. and closing at 6 p.m., not all of them do. For example, the saloon is open from noon to midnight. The clinic closes early at 3 p.m. Clint's blacksmithing place closes at 4 p.m., which is just bewildering to me given the fact that if you need Clint to process geodes, upgrade tools, etc., the most likely time that you're going to want to meet him is after you've done a day of mining, which means it's probably going to be late, but then you can't meet him until the next day. And the whole game has this problem of various places being closed and not opening early enough or closing too early. It makes it incredibly frustrating when you're trying to accomplish something and, oh, it's Wednesday, so Pierre's is closed randomly, and now you've got to wait an entire day in order to get the seeds that you need. Or you've just caught a bunch of fish and you want to sell them to Willie, but oh no, his shop is closed. This is why I'm talking about how you need mods. Basically, this game requires mods in order to fix the game because the game has such a quality of life problem. And ultimately, what the game winds up feeling like is it winds up feeling like a Gacha-less Gacha game. So you'll know from gacha games or mobile games as they're known, those games will have certain tactics built into them. They'll make tasks unnecessarily cumbersome, whether that be that the tasks are repetitive or just take a lot of time to do, and then they will sell you the shortcut to those tasks. So all kinds of games, Genshin Impact, whatever, mobile or gacha games that you know about, Lost Ark, whatever those games are, they'll have certain timers, certain things that you simply cannot progress quickly on or that are just very repetitive and tedious, but you can spend real money to speed up those processes. I could go and grind in Genshin Impact to get Primo Gems, or I can just spend real world money to just give myself a bunch of Primo Gems and then get the pulls. Stardew Valley has no microtransactions, it has no gacha system, but the game feels like it does. It feels like a game that should be the kind of game that is selling you the items and abilities that are going to speed up your production, that are going to skip past the repetitive stuff, but it just doesn't have that stuff in it, but it kept all the repetition in it. It kept all the time sink in it, which is why I think that the game is basically in an unplayable state without modding it to significantly improve these quality of life problems. The game also has a real problem with being unexciting. Really, nothing happens that is too exciting in the game, and I get it, it's a cozy game, it's not meant to be like this. It's not meant to have big flashy spectacles or heart-pumping action, but damn, the amount of just nothing going on in the game, it just winds up making the game so boring. In fact, I spent most of my time playing this game with just podcasts or YouTube videos open in another window because it takes so little concentration and effort to actually do any of the things in the game. Everything in the game is basically nothing more complicated than just a few button presses, and you can do it all fairly mindlessly. The only part of the game that I would say actually feels like a game is the mines and the arcade machines. So the mines specifically do take a little more concentration. There are enemies that can attack you. You do actually have to make use of your time trying to locate the down ladder in order to get to the next level. And you feel like you're making progress when every 5th level gets you another elevator that you can use to go back, and shortcut your way down here. And there's an actual end state. It's not endlessly grinding for more crops to yield, planting more seeds to grow more crops, to sell those crops to get money to buy more seeds to grow more crops. There is an actual finite amount of levels. You can actually get down to the final level of the mines and obtain the treasure at the bottom of the mines. This is also the area that felt the most exciting in terms of needing to finish this place with enough time left on the clock that you could make it back to your barn, to your farm bed without collapsing. So there was at least some small smidgen of excitement in actually having to engage with the game in the mines. The second part of the game that actually feels like a real game is, strangely enough, the Journey of the Prayer King little mini arcade game that you can play in the saloon, which, shockingly, feels like more of a game than the rest of the entire game with all of its activities put together. Here, there is actual action. You do actually have to pay attention to what it is that you're doing, getting power-ups, avoiding enemies, and once again, there is a finite amount of levels. You can technically play the game as long as you want with New Game Plus versions of the game, but there is a definitive end state with a final boss that you can defeat. Whereas Junimo Kart is actually complete horseshit. This is going to be hard to describe without you actually playing the game yourself, but it's just way too goddamn hard. It is incredibly easy to misjudge how far a jump is, or accidentally fall off a thing, and in some cases, there is actually just straight up no way for you to avoid to get hit. I've played this a whole bunch of times, so I'm actually fairly good at it now, although I've still not been able to actually finish Junimo Kart. Looking online, in fact, the major problems that I see people having with the game tend to be, 1, how difficult Junimo Kart is, and 2, a lot of people dislike the fishing minigame and will straight up skip it or just use mods to auto-complete the fishing minigame. It wouldn't be so bad if Junimo Kart actually had save points, but you do have to make your way through 6+ levels in order to finish Junimo Kart, and it does not save at any point during that time. If you die and lose all of your lives, you have to start all the way over again. And it is very easy to misjudge how far a jump is, how much power you need in a jump in order to get to the next level. And again, some places are just straight up impossible to get through without getting hit once. I will be talking about the mods that I installed for the game, but that'll come later in the mods section. So for now, I want to just say that the main takeaway that you should take from this part is that the game is significantly improved by having these mods that fix these quality of life problems. And again, this isn't about making the game easier, it's about fixing the tedium, boredom, repetition, and time waste is built into a lot of the base game. One thing you may be asking is like, well, yeah, technically, even if these tasks are tedious, the mining, the ranching, the farming, the fishing, like you don't have to do any of those things, right? And yes, technically, you don't have to do any of the activities that are in the game. Like, technically, you don't have to make any money whatsoever. You could just sit in your house and sleep over and over and over and never interact with any of the villagers and never do any farming. And like, your character doesn't like die of starvation if you don't farm, but that's the game. The game is farming, it is ranching, it is fishing, it is mining. And when those activities are tedious, boring, repetitive, bad, the game really needed to have fixed all of these problems. Now, there's no completely overhauling it, but I do think modding it significantly improves the experience. So let's talk about the NPCs in the game. Now, this is the part of the game that I was the most disappointed in. While quality of life issues and repetition in the game can be fixed with mods, the blandness and one-dimensionality of the NPCs cannot. There are 28 characters, with a few more being introduced as the game goes along, namely these guys down here, with some of those being dateable bachelors and bachelorettes, and the rest being various other characters in the town who you can meet. And as I said, my main problems with these characters are that most of them are fairly one-dimensional. They usually have exactly one aspect to them, and they're not really more complicated than that. Although, again, I haven't seen every single cutscene from every character, so maybe some of them are more interesting. but a lot of them, in fact, most of them are just not. There's also the problem that in order to see more deeply into the characters and get more of their backstory, you have to get their heart levels up to very high amounts. Usually, it's only at the 8 heart count that you actually start seeing into characters' backstories, and remember, it takes an incredibly long time to get these characters to those points. So let's talk about the non-marriage candidates before I get to the marriage candidates. So first things first, let's start with the characters that are the most common characters that you're going to be meeting, which is usually the NPCs that have some game-related function to them. Those characters are going to be Clint the blacksmith, of course, because you're going to be doing a lot of blacksmithing. Marnie for all of her ranching-related needs. Pierre, since he's the grocer that you're probably going to be meeting a lot. And Robin, the carpenter. So first, let's start off with Robin. Robin is actually the character that I most wish was a marriageable candidate and just isn't. She's married to Demetrius, and they have a daughter, Maru. Robin is self-sufficient, is running a fairly profitable business as the town carpenter, and is endearing to the player if for no other reason than just because she helps you out with all of your carpentry needs. Whereas Demetrius is the town scientist, and there's nothing really more interesting to him than that. He's just the town scientist. Similarly, Maru is also problematic in that she's basically a young up-and-coming scientist following in the footsteps of her father, but there's not really much more to her than that, other than that Demetrius is more involved in the biological sciences in terms of like the mushroom cave that he sets up for you, whereas Maru has an interest in astronomy. But beyond those very narrow aspects, there really isn't much more to them than that. In fact, when I say that Robin is the character that I wish was a marriageable candidate the most out of the ones who aren't, this seems to be a sentiment shared by most of the community, as there are mods that make Robin a marriageable candidate despite her marriage to Demetrius, which may be the first time that the black guy was actually NTR'd. Next up is Clint. And again, there really just isn't that much to say about him. He's just the town blacksmith. He occasionally comments on how he's basically lonely and doesn't really have friends or other people interested in him, but also says that he takes pride in his work as a blacksmith, and that's pretty much it. There's just nothing more to him than that. Next up is Marnie. She is the mother of Jas and is also related to Shane. All three of those characters live together. Marnie is obviously the town rancher and is the one who sells you all of the farm animals and other farm ranching related equipment that you need. But beyond that, there really isn't much more to her other than that she is secretly dating Lewis, the town mayor. For her part, Jas is just completely uninteresting. I really can't even say a single thing about her other than that she's one of the only 2 children in the town, with Vincent being the other one. Shane is a little more interesting. He's the town alcoholic, and is initially the character who is the most rude to you, regularly telling you to fuck off and that he doesn't want to talk. If you unlock more of his cutscenes through getting his heart rating up, he will start to warm up to you, and you can eventually see scenes of him really going down the traditional depressing alcoholic route. Unfortunately, I just don't think his route is that interesting. Additionally, there's the problem of that while he initially seems to reform and kind of get out of his addiction, I've heard from players that marry Shane that he goes right back to being an addict and has a sloppy, gross, unkempt room in the house if you marry him. Then there's Mayor Lewis. He's the mayor of the town, and he's the one that you talk to about any sort of special events that happen, like festivals and whatnot, to get those festivals going. He's also secretly dating Marnie, seemingly just because he feels embarrassed about it, or he feels like there's some sort of conflict of interest, even though it doesn't appear that he's giving special treatment to anyone. He's also the character who is picking up all of the items that you leave in the shipping bin every night. A lot of players have derided Lewis as basically being an incompetent mayor, and we're sort of told that the town is maybe not doing so good until our main character comes along to revitalize it with the farm selling produce, although we don't really see any evidence of that. He's also the character who's probably the most related in the Joja Corporation versus natural farming other than Pierre, which is another storyline that I felt never really got anywhere. You would think that the whole mega corporation comes into town and, demolishes all of the local businesses would be more of a plot point in the game, but nothing ever really comes of it. In fact, Pierre's prices are actually cheaper than Joja Mart's, which just really doesn't make any sense given the point that they're trying to go with. I never really thought too much of Lewis either. He's just, again, not that interesting. Then there's, of course, Pierre, who is going to be your main seller of crops for your farm. He is married to Carolyn, and their daughter is Abigail. Pierre is probably the character in the game who's the most subtly an asshole. So once you wind up selling your produce to Pierre, other characters can comment on picking up items from Pierre's and will comment on the, quality of those items and how they loved X and YZ dish for dinner and how it was so great that Pierre sold it to them. And the implication is that Pierre is taking credit for the produce that you are growing and selling to him, which appears to be the case, and we never really get much more to him than that. Also, Pierre's shop is randomly closed on Wednesdays, making him even more of a pain in the ass. Carolyn, for her part, is at least maybe slightly interesting, although I don't think I could tell you a single thing about her other than that she holds an exercise class with the other town ladies on Tuesdays. Abigail is the bachelorette that most of the people playing the game seem to be fairly fond of, but I'll talk about her later. George and Evelyn are the old couple in town, with George being more of a curmudgeon, although in his case, it's more understandable than Shane's because at least he's an old guy in a wheelchair, whereas Evelyn is the sweet wife. Although, again, there's not really too much more to them. George is the old town curmudgeon who slightly warms up to you as you give him more hearts, and Evelyn's just always a sweetie, although again, neither of them have really much character to them. They are the grandparents of Alex, who is one of the marriage candidates. Again, I'll get to him later. Gus is the owner of the saloon. That's bar for us modern folks. And again, there's not really much to him other than that he's kind of a loser who wants your help getting together with some of the women in town, although that never really amounts to anything. Jody is the mother of Vincent and Sam. They all live together. Her husband is Kent, who's away fighting in the war. Oh yeah, did I mention that? This cozy little farming simulator game, there's actually apparently a disastrous war going on someplace overseas, although we're hardly given any information about it. Anyways, Jody is, I don't know, she's a mom. There's nothing really much to say about her. Vincent is also a little precocious kid. There really isn't much to say about him other than that, I don't know, he likes snails. You can give him snails as a loved gift. You can also give him grapes as a loved gift, which is a little bit more helpful in the fact that it's a gift that's forageable that you can get in a fairly good quantities during its season. Other than that, that's just gameplay stuff, not much to say about him personally. Then there's Sam, who's, he's in a band with Sebastian, and then later Abigail, and he skateboards sometimes. That's pretty much all I can say there. Then there's Kent. He's away for the entire first year of the game. It's not until the second year that he shows up. You're given a little bit of information in that he is not adjusting too well to being back home in civilian life and that he doesn't feel like he can really connect with the rest of his family. They will also make comments saying how different he is, but it never really seems to go beyond that. He seems to just sort of stroll around and be unemployed for the rest of the game. If there's a cutscene that I'm missing, let me know, but otherwise it feels like there isn't really much to him, and it seems like a lack of content that really should be in the game if he was going to be introduced. Otherwise, it seems really disappointing that his storyline is basically just he comes back, he can't connect to his family, he struts around town doing nothing. Linus is the local homeless guy. He lives in a tent a little bit north of Robin's carpentry shop, and his storyline involves him rooting around in people's garbage cans for leftover food or just foraging randomly. He doesn't even have proper clothes. He has this tunic made of leaves, I believe. And the culmination of his storyline is basically you give him gifts, you increase the heart levels with him, and then he sort of just is like, I'm glad that you accepted me as being a homeless dude while nobody else did. And everybody else in town doesn't really seem to have any negative opinions of him either. They occasionally offer him free handouts, like Gus will offer him free food, or they'll offer to help him, but he's just like, nah, I prefer being a homeless guy living in a tent, and that's his whole storyline. I have no idea what Eric Barone was going for with this character. Sandy lives in the desert, which is an area that you unlock by fixing the bus either through the community center bundles or through the Jojamart route. There really isn't much to say about her. She runs a shop in the desert selling some unique items, and she's friends with Emily. It's also very weird that she's not a marriageable candidate. So most of the characters that are not marriageable candidates sort of make sense in that they're either too young, like Jazz and Vincent are children, so obviously they're not marriageable, or they might be some weird character like the Wizard. I get why he's not marriageable. Or they might be somebody who's already married, like Jody and Kent, Robin and Demetrius, Pierre and Carolyn, but for other characters, I really don't understand why they're not marriageable. And in the case of Sandy, I don't really get it. Pam is an old curmudgeonly lady and is the mom of Penny. They live together in a trailer, and she seems to be a lush who just loves to get drunk all the time. She also is the bus driver for the bus to the desert, although the bus to the desert initially begins the game as non-functional, so during the beginning of the game, she's just doing nothing and making no attempt to find a job when she doesn't have the bus driver gig. Again, you would think that the whole plotline here would be that, like a character like George or Shane, that maybe she starts off initially as a character who's hostile towards you and is brash and abrasive, and then would slowly warm up to you, but not really. She's just kind of a dickhead the whole game. The dwarf is a character that you can find in the mines once you have a pickaxe of sufficient level to break a rock in the starting area open. It's a dwarf. It's one of the magical creatures in the game, and there's nothing really to say about it. He also runs a shop where you can buy certain unique items. That's it. Similarly, Krobus is a shadow creature who will appear in winter. You run him down to unlock the ability to find secret notes, and then he will show up in the sewers, selling you against certain unique items. Not really anything to say about him either. Willie runs the bait and fishing shop. Pretty much the only thing to say about him is his gameplay elements. He buys fish from you and he sells you fishing related items like additional fishing rods, tackles to put on them, etc. But as for personality, he really doesn't have any. The wizard Rasmodius lives in the tower west of town. He's mainly the one who's involved in all of the magical related stuff in the game, although even his storyline doesn't really amount to much. And he doesn't really seem to have a personality outside of being the wizard. Leo is a child character who lives on Ginger Island, introduced in the 1.6 update with the Ginger Island added. He's a kid who lost his parents having, I guess, washed up on shore during a shipwreck. And he's made friends with the birds on the island and doesn't really seem to have any social connections, although apparently as you progress his storyline, he can show up in town and make friends with the other kids, but that's really it. I didn't play too much of the Ginger Island expansion, so I can't say too much about him, but he seems just as one-dimensional as the rest of the characters. Then there's these other characters down here. So these are characters who not only can you not date them, but you can't even give them any gifts. The only ones really worth talking about here are Gunther, who runs the library/museum. I mean, that's it. And Marlin, who runs the Adventurers Guild. He's involved in everything mining combat related, so he'll sell and buy weapons and special power rings from you. But other than that, there really isn't anything to say about him. Morris is the manager of the Joja Mart. He's depicted as a fairly one-dimensional, greedy manager. If there's anything more in-depth to him from going the Joja route, I don't know about it. And then these other characters are basically in the same route. They're just gameplay related. They either only show up very briefly or only very much later on, or they just have minor gameplay additions. Other than Birdie and Professor Snail, who are part of the Ginger Island content, which again, I've barely seen anything of them. In fact, I've never even met Professor Snail because I don't know how to unlock him. And Gil, like Marlin, is part of the Adventurers Guild, and you basically just talk to him to turn in Monster Slayer quests, and that's it. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the marriage candidates. So the marriage candidates are 6 and 6 divisions between the two sexes. So you've got Alex, Elliot, Harvey, Sam, Sebastian, and Shane for the men, and Abigail, Emily, Haley, Leah, Maru, and Penny for the women, although the game allows for homosexual relationships. So technically, no matter what sex you pick for your main character, you can pick any of these characters to romance regardless. For me, I enjoy when I have a game like an RPG or anything else that has a character creation system. I enjoy playing female characters who are white or Asian with long red hair. So of course, I did the same thing in Stardew Valley, regardless of which save file I was on. However, I also like if there are romance options in the game for any sort of dating game, Mass Effect, whatever. I enjoy romancing female characters. So again, any game that I play like this, I'm going to play a white or Asian character who's a woman with long red hair, and I'm going to romance another woman if possible. With that said, let's still talk about the men anyways, because I would have romanced any of the men if they were sufficiently interesting enough. Alex is a typical jock douche bro who is just into football and working out, and there really doesn't seem to be much more to him than that. There's a little bit more revealed with his backstory if you get sufficient amounts of hearts up for him, with him talking about his parents having died, but there really just isn't much more to him. He's very off-putting. I've heard that his responses will be different depending on what gender you are. So a lot of people say that if you're a man, a lot of his dialogue will come off as him being like sort of a bro, but if you're a woman, he comes off creepier. And this, again, is not context dependent. It is literally he has different dialogue depending on what gender your character is. I can't personally attest to that because I haven't played as a male character, so I don't know how his responses are any different. But I can say that having seen him in the game, he was not interesting, and he just, again, came off as a typical, uninteresting, like, cliche jock character. Elliot looks like he came straight out of a romance cover art and has this, like, long, sort of pretentious Fabio haircut. He lives on in a shack on the beach, and the only thing I can say about him is that he's an aspiring writer, and he can play the piano. And he doesn't really seem to have much personality beyond that, other than he comes off a little bit like a pretentious snob, as though he's better than everyone else, although it's not quite overt enough to say that for sure, but it's enough so that I don't really like him. Also, Elliot and Alex both have the problem of Elliot lives in a shack on the beach, which makes him obnoxious to try to actually talk and give gifts to because he's not around very much and it's hard to get into his shack. And both of them have strict issues with the loved gifts that they'll receive, making it difficult to actually upgrade them. For Alex, I usually just created a bunch of protein bars to give him out of the seeds that I would gather, and Elliot was just whatever lobsters I could get, and then eventually just squids or fruit if I couldn't, which made them very difficult to actually level up in hearts. Harvey is the town doctor who works at the clinic, and it seems like he has no real role in the town other than George, the old man, will come for checkups, but other than that, nothing really to do. He also comes off as a dork, and I can't really say anything about him other than that there's exactly one cutscene in the game where he likes airplanes, and that's it. Sam is, of course, the son of Jody and the older brother of Vincent, and has his father Kent away in the war. He's a member / leader of the band with Sebastian and then later Abigail, and he skateboards. He also likes Joja-Cola as one of the gifts that you can give him. That's pretty much it. Sebastian, who seems to be the most popular male character for romancing amongst the fan base, is a quiet, introverted tech nerd guy who apparently does coding at home. He seems to be the most interesting out of all the male characters. He's also, in my opinion, the most attractive out of all of them. And it helps that while he has the problem of being frequently in his room, which makes it obnoxious to talk to him, if you actually do get to talk to him, one of his loved gifts is frozen tears, which you can get in relatively good amounts from mining. If I was going to pick any of the male candidates to romance, it would be Sebastian. And then finally, there's Shane, who I've already talked about. He's just a drunken mess and is probably, in terms of a character, the worst out of any of the characters. And it's kind of shocking to me that he is a dateable candidate. I also think all of the male characters have this problem of generally being uninteresting and, in multiple cases, unattractive, a drunken mess, a pretentious asshole, a jock douche bro, and then just not terribly interesting. Which means that if you are going to pick one of the male characters to romance, it's basically just Sebastian or bust. Then there's the female characters, and I'll start from worst to best. So Maru is the worst, and she's the worst only because she's just so flat and uninteresting. She's just scientist daughter who likes astronomy, and then that's it, and there's nothing really more to her. Then there's Haley. Haley looks like a fashion model and is incredibly superficial. She, like Shane, is one of the characters who will initially just say main things to you because, and at least in Shane's case, it kind of makes sense in that he's a drunken lush who's at a really bad place in his life, whereas Haley is more of just a spoiled brat and a bimbo who constantly talks down to you and will say things like, ew, what are you wearing? You went out in that, and talks about shopping. In fact, there's one cutscene with her sister Emily where they're talking about dividing chores, and Emily is asking her to clean under the cushions, which is a little bit weird, I have to say, but it appears that that's literally her only task to do in their shared house, and Haley just can't get over it and is making a big deal out of it. Basically, she's a bitch, and it's shocking again to me that one, the character is written this way, and two, that she's a dateable candidate. Then there's Emily. Emily is a weirdo, and so one of the things with the game is that none of the characters' ages are ever stated. There's nowhere that you can look up and it says what specific age they are. You kind of have to just guess it based on how they look. So with some characters, it's going to be fairly obvious, like, you know, Evelyn and George, the old couple, where obviously they're old. They're at least probably 70 or older. You know, Vincent and Jazz are kids. They're obviously young kids. They're they're at least under 13. Not sure exactly how old they are. In the case of Emily, she could literally be anywhere from 20 to 60 years old because her face just looks weird. The second part is that she has a bunch of really trippy psychedelic cutscenes that come across as either she's crazy or on drugs. I'm not really sure what to make of them. I think they're supposed to be endearing, like, oh, what a quirky character. But to me, she just came off as insane or a drug addict. Beyond that, there really isn't much more to say about her other than that I guess she's sort of into fashion in the same sense as Haley, where she has clothes customization game options. So the next one is maybe a tie, but I'm going to put Penny as the next one. So Penny is the teacher for Vincent and Jazz. Daughter of Pam, lives in a trailer, and she's initially comes off as kind of sweet and caring, but the problem is that, one, her role as the town teacher is kind of underwhelming given the fact that she's only teaching 2 kids in the whole town and seems to have no other purpose besides that. Secondly, she complains about her life a lot. And while that might be forgivable in the sense that her mom, Pam, is kind of a bitch, she just generally complains. In fact, the most of her dialogue I can think of is just her complaining about the sorry state of affairs of her life and sort of just moping around as this sullen sulk who's not proactive and seems to have no agency and just views herself as a victim. So I immediately discounted her based on that. Then there's Abigail. So Abigail seems to be the character that's most appealing to gamers. She's a gamer herself. She has Journey of the Prairie King at home on her console. She's more of an adventurer. She talks about how she wants to go into the mines and be an adventurer, although she never actually does that. She's in a band with Sam and Sebastian. She's got the cool purple hair, and she just generally has more like sweet, caring, and fun activities and cutscenes. However, she's also, again, kind of a spoiled brat who just lives off of her parents and doesn't really seem to have any goal in life other than she's in college, never really specified what for, and she kind of wants to be an adventurer, but sort of in it like a naive way, like somebody who wants to be a cop because they think it's going to give them prestige or something, and not really because she wants to do anything meaningful. So I discounted her here. And that leaves Leah, the obviously best choice. So Leah is an artist who works on paintings. She lives in a little cabin down below Marnie's ranch, and she's the only character out of all these characters who actually seems to have her shit together. She comes across as an actual adult, seems to have actual interests. She's actually kind and caring, and she accepts driftwood as a loved gift, worthless garbage that I fish out of the ocean all the time, which makes her one of the easier characters to romance, at least in terms of gift giving. In terms of schedule, she's a fucking nightmare because she spends most of her time in her cabin inaccessible, and then when she's not there, she spends a lot of time down by the lake drawing. And the only times I really find her are either when she's wandering around town or at the saloon sometimes. But in terms of personality, she's obviously the best character out of any of the bunch. In fact, any character in the game, period. Both of my playthroughs, I romanced Leah. So ultimately, what does this come down to? Well, the big problem here is that it's a lot of boring, flat characters that have one single aspect to their personality and not much else, or are literally just there to be gameplay elements like the dwarf, wizard, and Krobus, who are really just there to unlock secret notes or unlock magic stuff or give you items. I don't grade on a curve. So if I were to hypothetically grade all of these characters, it wouldn't be like, oh, Emily is a B because she's not an atrocious, awful person. Is the character interesting? Was I interested in knowing more about the character? Did I enjoy the cutscenes they were in? And in terms of that, this is what these characters would score. So red X means that the character, I either never met them, or they're in the game so little that I may as well have never met them, or the character is uninteresting, or flat or bland, or they're a jerk. A gray X means that I'm just neutral about the character, like maybe they're a little interesting, but not really. They don't really have much to them. And a check mark means the character is actually good, in some regard. I was actually interested in seeing their full range of cutscenes, getting them up to max hearts, and I was not disappointed once I did that. Now the thing is, even if you disregard this entire section here as like not really counting, and we just focus on these characters, this is still a horrible hit rate. If we consider the green check mark good and anything else bad, So this is 34 total characters, and only 3 of them I actually liked in any significant way. That's horrible. That's a hit rate of 8%. That's a super F. And if you disagree with me and you think the characters are actually a lot more interesting than what I'm saying and that they don't have the personality of cardboard, how about trying the Red Letter Media Plinkett test? Describe the Stardew Valley character without saying what they look like, what they wore, what their profession is, or what their role is in the game. Describe them like you've never seen Stardew Valley. For a lot of these characters, I don't think you could do it. Another thing that I find very perplexing is that, so these characters and the art style of the game as a whole evolved and developed as Eric Barone worked on the game, and you can see actually, if you go to the wiki, previous iterations of how these characters used to look, and in a lot of cases, the previous character design was better than the finished version. So for example, you can look at previous versions of Alex, and although, as you can see, some of these earlier designs of the character, some of them are like a lot sketchier or feel more unfinished. But for example, I like this portrait of Alex way more than this finished portrait. He looks, again, much more like a douchebag jock here than he does here. Even this character portrait over here, while he's definitely not as physically attractive, he's a lot more endearing and relatable. Elliot's previous portraits, basically every single one of them looks way better than the finished version over here. Here, he just looks like a pretty boy, whereas here he looks like a douchebag. It's in particular the eye. The eyebrow arch, the sneering smile, how the head is turned sideways for the portrait. All of these versions are way better than this one. Harvey's previous portraits down here are much better than the finished pedo stash version we got. Although that's not true in all cases. For example, I would say that Sebastian looks much more attractive in the further along portraits and the finished portrait, whereas here he looks more like a goth loser, like more of a shut-in. The hair looks more unkempt, although it's pretty close to the finished version, but it's in the way that it's designed. Although I do like Abigail's finished portrait, the green hair would go a lot better with Carolyn. Something to remember, especially for Stardew Valley veterans, is that it can be a bit overwhelming at first, trying to absorb how many different characters are in the game, where they all are, what the layout of the town is, who's related to who, and Carolyn's green hair also being on her would make it more clear that they are mother and daughter, as opposed to the purple hair, which makes her just look like some complete stranger wandered into their shop. Emily, in her previous portraits, looks a lot younger and more attractive than what we get in the finished version, where she looks like a crazy cat lady, which she basically is, just she's a crazy bird lady. Haley's earlier versions makes her look far more sweet and innocent than this sort of like bimbo fashion model that we get in the more finalized version with the crazy scraggly hair. That looks like she doesn't even take care of herself. Leah is best girl and is perfect the way she is. Maru's original hairstyle makes her look way more unique and interesting. Even this version of the hair is much better than the final version. And one thing to note is that the appearances do matter. It's not just about the character being attractive, it's also about the character being memorable. This version is much blander and more Velma-esque than these versions. One last thing that I'd like to point out about the characters, and specifically in terms of the marriage candidates, is that there's, I don't know if anyone else felt this, but there's a sort of creepiness factor with the age gaps between the characters that you can date and the age of the main character. So again, there's never a specific age given for how old all of these characters are, but a lot of them are very specifically, obviously teenagers, even if they're 18. Alex, Sam, Sebastian, Abigail, and Maru are all living with their parents and are all, I believe, in college, every single one of them. And Haley and Emily, even though they're living on their own or with each other, but not with their parents, also, Haley at least seems particularly young. And so there's also no age given for our main character. However, the main character is working at Joja Corp, so presumably they went to college, and even assuming they got to college at exactly 18 and did a 4-year degree and exactly finished at 22, then got a job at Joja Corp. This means they're, at the very least, probably worked for Joja Corp for like minimum a year, if it was such a soul-sucking job that they just wanted to quit and go live on a farm, if not 2 or 3 years. So that places the character at the youngest at like 23, which is not a huge age gap. That's a 5-year difference between them and these other characters. However, there is also the difference between life experience. You have somebody who's who's worked in a corporation with a real adult job and is a self-sufficient farmer working on their own farm. And then you've got somebody who's a teenager in college living with their parents. Now, is that exactly a problem? No, but it did come off as a little bit creepy to me, which to me gives a barrier to entry for any romance option between the main character and any of these other characters, be them Alex, Sam, Sebastian, Maru, Haley, and Abigail, at the very least. So with all that said, let's talk mods, because again, this is where I think the game is going to be significantly improved. So all of them are available at Nexus Mods, or at least most of them are. You do have to make an account to download mods from here, but it's free. And you can download all of these mods. Now, Stardew Valley is the game that I've modded more than any other game. So for Subnautica, for example, that game, I really only needed around 4 to 5 mods to make the quality of life problems fixed. In Stardew Valley, I have like, I don't know, I've lost count. There's like 100 of them. So the first thing you're gonna need is Smappy, which is the main thing that gets you to have all of these mods work. And then a lot of the mods also require additional mods to make them work. So things like Content Patcher, Space Core, things like that. Every mod will always have a list of other mods that it's required for that mod to work. So from there, you're going to want to navigate to your Stardew Valley mod folder. So I'm on Macintosh right now, but it's going to be similar directory if you're on Windows. So in this case, it's users and then me, then library, application support, Steam, Steam apps, common, Stardew Valley, contents, macOS mods. And then in here, you just drag and drop whatever you want in here. So once you get Smappy and install Smappy, which is a very simple process, it takes you through how to install it. You go back over here, and then whenever you download an app, you just unzip it and then just drag the folder in here. So as you can see, I have a lot of apps, or a lot of mods here. So I'll go through them one at a time and explain exactly why I got all of these mods. So the mods will break down into a number of different things. So you're going to have your quality of life mods, which are going to be things that improve the quality of life of the game. Then there's your more like cheating mods, which let you just like spawn in items, give yourself infinite health, etc. There's going to be aesthetic mods, which are things that improve the look of the game, add in different graphics, etc. And then there's going to be expansion mods. Now, these might be things as simple as adding new dialogue to the characters or adding entire new characters and areas. So when you first launch the game with mods installed, it's going to run Smappy, and it's going to show you all the mods loading up here, and it'll show you any errors for mods that maybe are out of date. So like up here, you can see all these pink ones are out of date, and then it gives you a link to go download the most current one, and it'll tell you any other problems that may be occurring. So once you're actually in the game, the way you're going to find your mods is you're going to open the menu, and you're going to go over here to Options, and scroll all the way down to the bottom, Mods. And then this is going to show you all of your mods, and you can go into these mods to change their options. So the mods that I would consider indispensable in terms of improving the quality of life of the game. Let's go through them. The first one is Automate. Lets you automate crafting machines, fruit trees, and more by connecting them to chests. So what does this mean? Well, basically, this one doesn't require much changes, but it basically allows you to automate a bunch of stuff. The main thing is going to be, as you can see, I have setups here. So I've got like my furnaces, right? And then I've got a chest. So if we open the chest, oh, we've got coal and we've got iron ore, right? Instead of me having to take the iron ore out of the chest, take the coal out of the chest, walk over here to the furnace, put them both in the furnace. No, you just have them in the chest, and since they're right next to each other, the furnace will look at the chest and go, aha, there's coal and an item that I can smelt, and it will just smelt it. And then once it's done, I don't have to go and grab the smelted item out of the furnace. I just walk back over to it just immediately deposits it in the chest. And this will work with any sort of machine. So the charcoal kiln that's going to turn wood into coal, it'll just deposit it into the chest. These crab pots, it'll just take whatever's in the crab pot, put it into the chest. And if the chest has bait in it, it'll just auto deposit the bait into the crab pot. There's a bait machine next to it, boom. It'll put the bait into the crab pot. Oh, there's a recycling machine next to it that's going to take useless junk fished out of the crab pot and, you know, spit it back in here as like refined quartz or whatever. It'll just spit it back in here. And this is true of everything. So bees with honey, mayonnaise machines, lightning rods, trees that have tappers on them will just auto deposit pine tar in here. The mushroom cave. The mushrooms will just auto-deposit their mushrooms in here instead of me having to walk back over to the fucking cave and grab the mushrooms every single time they're ready. This is such a time saver and just makes everything more convenient. You can also set it up so that certain items create a pathway. So if you're familiar with something like, Minecraft Redstone, this basically works the same way. So in the modding options for automate, you can enable a connector. In this case, I've chosen crystal paths, but you can choose anything you want. And so everything connected on a crystal path is connected to each other. So all of these crystallariums, for example, that this is making diamonds. I don't have to go and grab the diamond out of here. I also don't have to have a chest next to every single one of these. I just have a bunch of crystal paths and all of these are connected to each other. Bada bing, bada boom, all done. It is such a time saver. Such a freaking time saver. This is one of the best mods you can get, and I consider it absolutely indispensable to enjoying the game. Next up is the bigger backpack. So this gives Pierre another backpack upgrade that you can buy at Pierre's. By default, it costs 50k gold, but you can change how much this costs. I don't consider the default amount of only 3 rows to be enough space, so this just gives you another item that you can buy on a 4th row. And notably, it gives you another item that you can buy, another upgrade that you can purchase. It doesn't just give you a 4th space. But if you just want a 4th space straight up, you can make it cost 0. The next one is fast animations. So this just lets you speed up a bunch of stuff. So eating and drinking, you don't have to waste time. You can speed up fishing. You can speed up milking. You can speed up shearing, swinging your tools, using the slingshot, attacking with your weapon. You can speed up how long it takes for Clint to break the geodes, how long it takes the bus to travel to the desert, how long it takes trees to fall down after you chop them down. This again just speeds up so much of the game so you don't have to waste time waiting for your slow-ass swings, slow-ass axe swings and pickaxe swings and attacks. The only part of the game that I would say that this makes easier is if you increase your weapon attack speed, because then you can just spam the attack button over and over, but you don't have to speed any of these up. I believe 1 is the default, and anything over that is increasing the speed. I think once you get up to like 5, the speed is crazy fast, so play with these numbers. If you want, this is the numbers that I've settled on, so like eating and drinking, 3, swing tool, 3, tree falling, 2. These feel good to me, but experiment and figure out what feels natural to you, because if you make them too fast, then it just like happens in a blink of an eye and it feels unnatural and weird. Next up is harvest with scythe. So right now the scythe is pretty useless. You only need it to gather hay from cutting down grass and to harvest certain crops. This just lets you harvest all your crops with the scythe, and it specifically lets you harvest multiple crops at a time with 1 swing of the scythe. So 1, it makes the scythe actually useful, and 2, it makes gathering all your crops a lot easier. You can also make harvest with sword an option, so if you just don't want the scythe at all, you can just harvest with the sword instead. The next one is look up anything. This one is incredibly useful. So this one is, all you have to do is when you're hovering over something, you just hit the F1 button and it'll tell you all about it. So let's say, how many hearts do I need to level up Leah? What does she like as gifts? Well, you just hover over her, click the F1 button, boom. It comes up. It tells you what her birthday is. It tells you what your romance status is. It tells you your friendship status. Have you talked to her today? Have you gifted her anything today? Have you kissed today? What are her loved gifts? What are her liked gifts? And it applies to anything else as well. So like chest. How many chests do you own? How many of these have you crafted? What does it do? You can gather over there. Garlic. Here's all the crop information. Here's what it's needed for. Here's who likes the crop. Here's what recipes that the garlic is used in. Here's the dye it produces. And if I don't want to grab a specific thing on the map, I can click Shift F1, and this lets me look anything up I want. So let's just say I want to know Lewis. Boom, I can pull Lewis up. He doesn't have to be around. So incredibly helpful. What if I want to know albacore fish? What do you need it for? How much does it sell for? How do you sell it to? Who loves it? Who likes it? What recipes is it used in? Where does it spawn? Incredibly helpful. What times does it spawn? Here's the fish pond. This just lets you look up anything you want. You're already going to be playing the game with the wiki open in another window. This just saves so much time. It just makes it so convenient. Now, the one downside to this is that this is basically playing with the wiki available, so you can look up stuff that you shouldn't know yet. but that's the same as if you just looked it up in the wiki anyway. So this just basically builds the wiki into the game. Makes the game so much more convenient. Next up is NPC map locations. Oh my god, so helpful. So by default, the map is blank, doesn't have any of the NPCs on it. It is such a pain in the ass when you are trying to find a specific NPC because you need to turn a quest in or you want to gift them something, and you just look at this map and none of these NPCs are on the map are listed. This just lists the NPCs on the map. Boom. I know exactly where they are, and now I can just go find them. So incredibly helpful. Self-serve is another one. Shops don't close. Well, that's not exactly true, but what this means is, so there will be plenty of times where you can like get to a character's shop, but they're not there. So like you go to Pierre's store, but oh, he's busy looking at a shelf. Or you go to Marnie's ranch, but oops, Marnie's missing. She's off somewhere else doing something. And when the NPC isn't at their store, you can't use their store. Oh, Clint is off doing something else when you need the blacksmith. This just means that when you go to their store, you can just access their store regardless of whether the NPC is there or not. So for example, so if I go to the blacksmith shop, oh look, Clint isn't here. I can just open up the shop and I can use the shop anyway as though he was here. No longer do you have to wait around and be like, oh god, where's the character? I don't know where they are. Oh, I can't use their shop now. And then finally, the to-do list. So this just lets you have a little in-game notebook. So right now the hotkey is L, so all I gotta do is pull L up, and then this will show me a hot list of what the stuff I want. So let's say, you know, it can be difficult to remember what you want to do every day, especially if stuff is time sensitive. So let's say I wake up in the morning and it's like, okay, what do I want to do today? Well, I want to plant my crops, and then I want to go to the mines, and I got to remember that I've got some artifacts to drop off at the museum. So let's put museum on the list, and I want to go to Marnie's, you know, to buy a chicken or something, right? So I input all of that there, and then it'll appear in the top left-hand corner of the things I want. And then when I'm done doing those things, so let's say I plant all the crops on my farm, well, I just go click done, and it's gone. Oh, I went to the mines and I did mining for the day, it's gone. It just helps you stay organized and remember to do the things you want to do. And you can also change these tasks into something else. So for example, I want to remember to harvest the fruit from my fruit trees. So in here, I have it that the fruit trees, this will remind me of the fruit trees every Monday and Friday, and it'll repeat every 7 days, but not in winter because the fruit trees don't grow in winter. So I have winter checked off, right? Same thing with my greenhouses. I want to make sure to check the greenhouse and, you know, get the crop then. So I'm going to remind myself every Monday and Friday and repeat every week. And you can just do this for whatever tasks you want. It makes, again, the game so much easier rather than having to either like write down what you want to do on a physical piece of paper or just remember everything in your head. So those are the mods that I would consider to be absolutely indispensable in terms of improving the quality of life of the game. However, there's a little bit more. So there is the CJB cheats menu and CJB item spawner. So these are the things that allow you to cheat. I'm going to talk about these specifically in the context of quality of life upgrades, and it's specifically going to be the cheat menu. So the cheat menu lets you do specific things. So open the menu is the P button, which you can of course change here if you want. But if I click P, this will show me I can give myself infinite health, infinite stamina, one-hit kill any enemy I want. I can make myself always have maxed out luck. But let's say I don't care about that. I just want quality of life things. Like I don't want to break the game and make it so that it's just, you know, super easy. I don't want to be able to just give myself 100,000 gold at a moment's notice with no difference. Mainly what I want this for is I just want the movement speed to be increased, right? Because we can look at the movement speed based on how it normally is and what it is at 5. So let's go. I'm going to stand over here. How long does it take to get over to the other side of the movie theater when I have normal movement speed, right? So this is normal movement speed. It is fucking agony moving this slowly. So I'm going to increase my movement speed to 5. All right, we're good. This is a good amount of movement speed. It's fast enough that I'm moving around really, you know, quickly, but it's not so fast that I'm the Flash and everything's blurring by. It's not 10 movement speed, right? To me, 5 movement speed feels like it's good enough. Like this is the right amount. And similarly, if I'm unhappy with my inventory size, I can increase my inventory size. So If I think the inventory size is bullshit, I can just increase it up to whatever I want. Better friendship mod. So adds thought bubbles over villagers to indicate their favorite gifts from your inventory and when they'd like to talk. So this just gives you a quick visual demonstration of, okay, it doesn't tell you what gifts they love in general, but it says like, if you've got an item in your inventory, it'll tell you what from your inventory is an item that they would like more than anything else in your inventory. It also shows if you haven't talked to them yet. So this is just a quick way, instead of having to, like, you know, let's say I talk to Isabel, right? And then I do other stuff, and then I come back and I see Isabel again, and it's like, have I talked to her today? I don't remember. This just gives me a quick indication of what that is. Same thing if I want, you know, to give her an item. I don't have to constantly jump back into the wiki or to look up anything to determine who wants what. It just makes it a lot easier to visually tell immediately who wants what if you've talked to someone, etc. There's also better ranching, prevents failed milk shear attempts, and displays when an animal can be milk sheared and petted. So this is just the same thing. Have you pet the animal already? You don't have to go up and check every single one of them. It'll just have a little indicator over it. Oh, these indicators over here, this is another mod as well, which will just give you reminders about stuff like characters' birthdays. You'll also see, it'll show me like what luck is, so I don't have to check the TV. Oh, the traveling merchants in town, it'll show me that. So one of the things I will note with mods is that, again, they are mods, which means they may not necessarily always work correctly, especially if the game gets updated. Usually if the game gets updated, it just breaks a bunch of the mods that were working with it, and then you've got to go download the newest mods. So sometimes it's like I would have an issue with a mod, and then I would be like, well, is the mod, like, is it not working the way I think it's supposed to be working? Am I missing something? Or is it actually just broken and not working correctly? But if you do want to use the cheat menu to cheat, you can do plenty of stuff. Again, infinite water in the water can, so you don't have to refill the water. Break everything in one hit, so like stone, for example, breaks instantly. Harvest with scythe is a part of the cheat menu, so you can just do it from here instead of having to get the harvest with scythe mod separately. You can give yourself money at a moment's notice in different increments. Same thing with casino coins, golden walnuts from Ginger Island, key gems. Farming and fishing, you can make it so that, you know, like, your animals get auto-fed, auto-petted. Give yourself infinite hay. Instant catch from fish, instant bite. Always throw max distance on the fishing line. So you can cheat in a whole bunch of ways. You can just upgrade your skills immediately. You can also give yourself different professions, even if they would normally conflict with each other. You can change the weather. You can change your relationships. So if the gifting everyone stuff, you know, mini game of the game is too tedious and boring, you can just max your hearts out whenever you want, or just change it to a different amount. Warp. This is so helpful. One of the things that I had a big problem with in the game was, why is there no fast travel? Now, I get that there kind of is fast travel, because once you finish the community center, or finish specific things in the community center rather, or the Joja Mart line, you can unlock the minecart and then you can go to specific spots. I felt like this was, even the minecart was kind of out of the way sometimes, or just didn't take me to specific locations that I wanted to. The warp location just lets you go wherever the hell you want. You can go to any specific spot exactly where you want instantly. Again, it makes it so much nicer and more convenient to just get around wherever you need to go. However, this does let you warp to places that you haven't unlocked yet. So again, you know, if you don't have good willpower to resist cheating, then maybe you don't want to get the cheat menu. You can change the time. You can also freeze time in specific spots. You can even change the date, season, and year. Advanced stuff, you can give yourself specific wallet items. You can also just auto-finish quests, right? So here's a list of the current quests that I have. I can just make it so that I auto-complete the quest, even if I didn't meet the conditions to complete it. Although, this is kind of risky. Like, as the section says, use this section at your own risk. This may cause issues like skipped mail events or quests, so be careful when you do this kind of stuff, right? You can auto-complete the community center, things like that. And then there's the controls. You can like change what hotkey opens the cheat menu, for example. Now the CGB item spawner is, if you click I on your keyboard, that's the hotkey. It just lets you pull this up and you can spawn in whatever you want. So if I want like albacore, boom, I can just grab an albacore and I can put albacore in my inventory. I can also put like 500 or like 999 albacores. Doesn't matter. So you can either use this to cheat straight up, or you can use it to sort of minorly cheat. So I often use it, for example, if I'm in a place like I have a quest and the quest is like, oh, you need to finish, this character needs, let's say again, like an albacore, right? And I know I have an albacore back at my farm. Let's say I'm like in town, right? And it's like, oh, this character wants an albacore as a gift or something. It's like, well, I know I have an albacore back at my farm. Do I really want to like run all the way back to my farm, get the chest that the albacore is in, run all the way back over here to talk to or do I just spawn an albacore in, and then the next time I'm at my chest, I'll just junk the albacore that's in the chest? This is, again, more on the cheaty side, so if you have poor willpower and you can't resist just, like, cheating your way past all the challenges in the game, and that's going to be less fun for you, then maybe don't get this mod. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the aesthetic mods. Dynamic reflections. So this basically just allows you to have reflections in the water. So you can see my reflection in the water here, right? And it'll also reflect other characters, not just you. Now, before I move on, you may wonder, like, okay, well, why do I want all of these aesthetic mods? Like, isn't your reflection in the water, like, do I really want a whole mod? Like, you want to download a whole mod just for that? This really adds to the game. When you get enough of these aesthetic mods that change the look of the game, it really just makes the game look nicer, be more fleshed out. Another mod that I would consider almost indispensable in the aesthetic mods is visible fish. Shows fish in the water. And here you can change the various options. I haven't changed anything here. What does it do? Well, it does what it says on the tin. You can see fish in the water. So not only does this look a lot nicer, I think, than just having the water be all the same generic tile repeated over and over. Now you can see the fish moving around underwater. This also has an important game function of showing you what the fish are in the water. So you don't go up to the water and be like, okay, wait, can I catch X fish that I'm trying to catch here, or can I not? Well, I know that I can catch it or not catch it because I can see it in the water. It just lets you tell immediately what is catchable and what isn't. And again, it shows you more than just fish. It shows you everything in the water. So seaweed, jelly, it'll show you everything that you can possibly catch in the water. Another mod is the flower mod for grass. So by default, grass usually just has the same sort of generic plain green look, whereas the flower mod adds, I believe it's called wildflowers. It'll add more just visual variety and beauty to your grass, which actually, to me, a lot of times makes me not want to cut down the grass because it looks a lot more interesting. But again, this is something that's like, it's not required. Your game is not going to be terrible if you don't have reflections or fish in the water or colorful flowers on your grass. But when you just add all of this stuff together, it just makes the game look so much nicer. Another one is puddles. So there's a mod that adds puddles after it rains. Again, it's a little thing. It just adds these little puddles on the ground the day after it rains. And it's not a big thing. It also works with the reflection mod as well. It's not a huge thing. It's fine, but it's just that little extra thing that makes the game feel more alive, more fun, more pretty. Another mod is seasonal cute characters. So this mod changes the portraits for a lot of the NPCs to be more pretty, more cute, more beautiful. I think in general, it fixes the portraits up a lot. In specific, I would note that, for example, someone like Elliot has a much nicer portrait now that's more akin to his older variations. Some characters, it doesn't change much or it barely changes. Others, like Elliot, it changes a lot. It also gives seasonal outfits for the characters. So the characters will have different portraits and outfits when it's spring, summer, fall, and winter. And again, is it a huge deal that someone is wearing like a winter coat or a more like Halloween themed outfit? It's not a huge deal, but it's just that little bit extra that makes the game feel more alive, more varied, makes it feel like more of a real world. There's also date night. So one of the complaints that people have is that once you get married, your spouse kind of just exists. They're just in your house and they kind of just lose all their personality and don't do anything anymore, which is a complaint that I have as well. So for example, Leah, I've married, and Leah used to do all kinds of things, like she would paint and color, and she would go down by the docks and paint paintings. And now she just sort of sits around the house and doesn't do anything, which I think is a problem in the game. Date night makes it so that occasionally your spouse will ask you on dates, and they're not a huge deal. It'll just be like you go to the saloon or something, but it just gives that little extra thing of like that your marriage actually matters. Similarly, there's another mod called Please Remember My Marriage, which gives additional dialogue options to the NPCs so that they will make remarks related to you getting married. So previously, it was the case that once you got married, nobody would even acknowledge that you were married. They would just, it would just be business as usual and no one would even care. Please remember my marriage just adds in additional dialogue options. And there's multiple mods that do things like add in a bunch of different dialogue options for the various characters in the game. And there's just so many more mods to talk about. I could go on forever. However, the big ones are going to be the expansion mods. So the expansion mods are mods that add in significant new content to the game. In particular, the ones I want to highlight are Stardew Valley Expanded, Ridgeside Village, and East Scarp. So I haven't done every single expansion mod. There's mods that add in like just 1 or 2 new NPCs or add in different locations. I know like Zuzu City is a place that gets mentioned by a bunch of the characters in the game, and so someone actually made an interactable Zuzu City map. For me, I haven't done that, but I did do Expanded, Ridgeside, and East Scarp. So to briefly go over these, so Expanded adds in a whole bunch of stuff, new items, new NPCs, etc. It changes a bunch of the NPCs and like alters some of the ones that you have on the map. There's also Ridgeside Village, which takes place up above here, and there's East Scarp, which is to the right. So to briefly go over those, so Expanded does a bunch of things. It adds in like more gardens around the town. So like, Pierre is supposed to be a guy who sells you crops. Why does he not have a garden? Well, it gives Pierre a garden. There's a new mansion over here where there's new NPCs that live. We've got Alex's dog is actually visible and you can go up and interact with the dog, as opposed to the dog was always just invisibly in the doghouse before. There's tons of additions to the map. There's like this area down here. Now this branches into the beach on the right or Sophia's Vineyard, Blue Moon Vineyard on the left, and you can go talk to the NPC Sophia over here, who's a new NPC in the game. There's a bunch of stuff like that. I'll get into all the specific characters because I think that's the meat and potatoes of a lot of these expanded mods. So Ridgeside Village, you can see the farm layout is a bit different. And so Ridgeside Village is up north past the bus stop. So it gets its own minecart track that can instantly teleport you to specific locations in Ridgeside, or you can just take the lift up. So you can go up the lift. You can also disable that cutscene if you don't want to see it. So you come out on here on the lift, and then you can look at the map, and there's this whole new Ridgeside map with a bunch of new characters. There's a ton of them. I think this adds in I think this literally like doubles the character count in the game. So it's Ridgeside Village, and it's like a whole second town, complete with its own notice boards that you can get quests on. It has a mayor for the town. There's a whole bunch of characters. Like the main town, it takes a bit of getting used to remember where everything is, and especially if this is your first time playing the game, it's going to be overwhelming if you add in all of these expansion mods all at once, and the character count jumps up to 77 characters to meet, and all of these additional areas to explore, but I think it's still worth it. Finally, there's also East Scarp, which is an area to the east of town. So this is East Scarp. Whole bunch of new area over here with a bunch of NPCs. One difference between East Scarp and Ridgeside, for example, is that Ridgeside comes with all of the characters already here. East Scarp comes with this area, and then you have to download the NPCs individually, so that adds a lot of individual mods to get. In this case, I didn't get all of the mods, all of the additional NPCs for East Scarp, but I got most of them. And it also, if you go to the Nexus mods page, comes with a list of recommended NPCs to get. And one of the things that adding in all of these additional characters does is, so the main town to me always felt a little bit sparsely populated. And I get that it's trying to be like a cozy game and you're in here with all of your little NPCs in town, but to me, it always felt like there weren't enough people living here. Whereas when you add in East Scarp and Stardew Valley Expanded and Ridgeside, it really fleshes out the town and makes it feel more alive and like there's more actual people living here. It's more vibrant. Like, it always struck me as really weird that Jazz and Vincent, for example, were the only 2 children in the entire town. Now we get a bunch more kids, and it feels like there's an actual play group instead of, well, Jazz and Vincent are friends just basically out of obligation because they're the only people here. This is Juliet, another character she's added from, I believe, Expanded. I really like Juliet. We'll get back to that. So it just helps in a lot of sense like that, where even if you're not necessarily interested in like new items and NPCs and whatnot that are introduced in these expansion mods, it just makes the main game feel better even if you don't participate. And the characters from Ridgeside and Scarp will also come over to the main town and will participate in the events. They'll participate in the festivals that are in town. They'll show up to the saloon at night with everyone else. So a lot of them have jobs in town, working at the grocery store, working at, you know, other places. Stardew Valley Expanded also expands on a lot of the characters, so it'll make things like, you know, you'll have things like the wizard Rasmodius can become romanceable. It'll let you give gifts to Gunther in the museum. It makes Morris from Joja Mart more of a like real character who feels like a real person as opposed to just an evil comic book villain. So there's a lot of improvements. Again, I can't speak to other expansion mods like Zuzu City, but I would recommend Scarp, Ridgeside, and Expanded. Anyways, to specifically comment on those, let's pull up the NPC pages for those expansions. So obviously you can find this stuff at Nexus Mod. So this is Stardew Valley Expanded. And if you go down here, so if you look at the requirements, you need the content patcher, you need the farm type manager, and obviously you need Smappy because it's a Stardew Valley mod. So here it is. And then it'll tell you how to install it. It'll give you like there's new NPCs, there's new character events. That's another thing where it like adds in a lot more dialogue. One of the problems with the main game can be after you've talked to characters a lot, it can feel like they're just repeating the same stuff over and over. When you get dialogue expansions, it makes it feel more like these are real people that have different variations of things to say, and it makes you actually want to talk to them to hear the different stuff as opposed to the characters repeating the same, you know, handful of lines of dialogue over and over and over. There's an expanded Joja storyline. Expanded also makes Joja Mart actually cheaper than Pierre's, which gives you an actual reason to buy from Joja as opposed to Pierre's. Changes the main farm map into Grandpa's farm. So this is the farm map with Stardew Valley Expanded. I think this looks a lot more natural and nice than the default map, which always felt like just a big square to me. New locations, new fish, new forageable items, etc., etc., etc. There's also Ridgeside Village. Same thing here. You get all of Ridgeside, you get a bunch of new characters, 50 new NPCs, obviously new marriage candidates, foods, new items to unlock. There's new combat zones to go to. Scarp is going to be the same thing. And as I said, Scarp has this issue of, I wish it just came pre-bundled with a bunch of NPCs. Instead, you get them one at a time from different mods. But here is the list of like recommended NPCs that they have that they say like, you know, download these guys. I didn't get all of them. I did get most of them though. And these are so extensive. These expansion mods are so extensive that they actually have their own wikis, just like the main Stardew Valley wiki. So here, this is Stardew Valley Expanded. It alters the wizard, and it alters Gunther, Morris, and those are like the big ones. It also changes the portrait for the traveling merchant. So just to quickly go over these, Sophia is the manager of a vineyard. She's also a new romance option. A lot of people say that she looks too young, so there's an option to change her character portrait to be older looking. Olivia and Victor are two rich folk that move into the mansion that is next to Pierre's and above the saloon. I was ultimately disappointed in where their storyline goes. I'm not going to get into it, but I do think they're nice enough characters. Claire is the cashier at Joja Mart, who previously is a just unnamed NPC with no lines of dialogue. This actually adds her in as a real character. Andy is another farmer that you can meet down in the forested area where Marnie's ranch is. He's kind of a rural farmer type guy. I actually kind of like him. Obviously, Gunther gets expanded. Martin is another character who also works at the Joja Mart. Marlin gets expanded as a character, as does Morris. We also get Susan. I believe she's up by the train station. One of the things is the train station gets significantly altered to be an actual location to go to, as opposed to just a blank nothing that it is now. So I'm a big fan of these characters. In general, obviously, a lot of the expansion mods have the same problem where a lot of the characters are still kind of one-dimensional, not that interesting, but I would say the expanded characters do at least as good of a job as the main game, if not better. Ridgeside Village is also obviously huge. The only things I have to say about here, I think the male characters have the same sort of problem of being pretty generic. Shiro is also one that I have an issue with his portrait. He's got what I think is supposed to be a scar on his cheek, but it sort of like bleeds over into his neck. It never looked right to me. And the rest of them are kind of just bland. Same thing with a lot of the bachelorettes as well. I really can't say much about them other than Floor. Floor is the shy one. She also hangs out with Penny and the kids a lot, so she has some sort of a personality there. The other ones are like, whatever. And then these are other marriageable candidates, sort of. It's a special, so I assume there's like specific unlocks that you need for these. A lot of these characters I also can't talk much about just because I didn't interact with them too much, either because they don't show up until a long time later. Like June doesn't, I believe June doesn't show up until fall. Bryle, I don't think I saw him until year 2. A lot of these characters are tied in with like Adventurers Guild storylines, so I didn't see them much. Zane also is not initially in the game. He doesn't show up until a long time later. Then there's these characters. Freddie and Lola are an old retired adventurer couple. Lenny is the mayor of Ridgeside and is the sister of Lewis, and I actually like her. Sunny, Maeve, and Arya and Louie are the rich family. They're like the super posh rich family in Ridgeside. I didn't care too much about them, although I did like Arya. Also, there's I don't know how to pronounce his name, Kihi and Trini. So there are 2 more children characters that are introduced, and Yuma, but primarily Kihi and Trini. Kihi and Trini feel like what Vincent and Jazz should have been. Kihi is this like fun-loving little trickster guy, and Trini is also like very fun-loving. They feel like more fleshed out and interesting child characters than Vincent and Jazz by a mile. Really like these 2. In fact, I think out of Ridgeside, these are my 2 favorite characters. There's also Kiwi, the Junimo. I didn't get too far into her plotline, but she's fine. Those are mainly the ones that I would talk about Ridgeside. I would say that Ridgeside mostly suffers from character bloat, where a lot of them are just kind of bland in the same way as like the main game has mostly characters that are kind of bland and uninteresting with only a few standouts. Ridgeside is in a similar vein and has the problem of having so many characters. Then there's Scarp. I really liked Aideen. She's a florist. She manages a bunch of flowers. She also gets into her own romance with Mateo, who's an adventurer that you can find up at the guild, who's also very charming. I like him way more than Marlon, the adventurer guy. And one of the things I do think is missing from the main game is like a lack of romance between other characters. In fact, so the characters who are not already married, I believe the only actual relationship we see in the entire game is Lewis and Marnie. And there's a little bit of flirting or characters expressing interest in some other characters. Like I believe Sam shows interest in Haley. Gus, I think, shows interest in Emily, I believe. Or is it Clint? I don't remember which one it is. But for the most part, everyone else just stays platonic. And that's one of the problems that happens in games where you can have dateable, like romanceable characters, which is because all of the characters that are romanceable have to be potential options for the main character. If you don't choose any of those characters, then none of them get put down a romance track with any other characters. I wish there were more dynamic than that. Sen is a shadow person character, a non-human, more magical side character. And this is the character that I think the dwarf / Krobus should have been. He feels like an actual person and not some weird, unknowable creature. And he will show up during festivals and in town as well with the other characters, even if he like sort of tries to keep a low profile. I really like Sen. I really, really like Juliet. She becomes one of the people working at JojaMart, and she's just got a very like lively, energetic personality that makes her very attractive in the sense of like wanting to talk to her. I think she's the character who I liked the most in terms of their storyline and cutscenes. I would never, ever skip any cutscene that she was in, and I would always pay laser-focused attention to all of her dialogue. She was the character that I most wanted to max out friendship on. Sterling is a drug addict / alcoholic, and he is basically the character that Shane should have been. He basically has the exact same kind of storyline where he starts off sort of okay and then becomes increasingly more addicted and eventually has to kick that addiction. But in his case, 1, he actually does kick the addiction as opposed to Shane. 2, he actually has friends as opposed to Shane, who just is whatever. 3, he's actually charming and hot, whereas Shane is mostly just an asshole. He's also given additional storylines with Shane in terms of their drinking buddies together. Eloise and her widower father Jacob are 2 more characters who show up. She just adds into the general sense of there's now more kids in town. Jacob is also, once again, pretty freaking hot and feels like a character that you would actually want to romance. There is also Jessie, who, I forget, she runs her own, like, some sort of farm or business, and she becomes friends with Linus, which fixes a major problem that Linus has of being this loner who only has any relevance because you, the main character, get involved with them. Lavril is a ghost girl who has a pet bunny rabbit doll, Void, who is also a character in the game. She's the most magical, non-magical character. I think she's like a ghost or part ghost or something. She has a whole storyline built around her. She also has a very memorable character portrait, and I really like her. She's a kid. She also will wind up hanging out with the other kids once you've met her. Similarly, Rodney is an aspiring writer, but unlike Elliot, he's not totally full of himself. And so he, once again, feels like the character that Elliot should have been. And then there's Rosa. She's another character who has some business. I think she runs the hotel in East Scarp, and she's friends with Julia. And again, I like her. She's got a very unique character portrait, very lively and upbeat. Henry and Mia are friends with Sterling, and they are non-giftable, non-romanceable characters. This is actually one of the reasons that I thought maybe the mods were broken, because Henry is so... he barely shows up, to the point where I literally thought the mod was broken and he just wasn't in the game. But he is in the game. You just don't see him much. And Scarp also introduces like a bunch of pet animal characters and whatnot. I think overall, like again, there's a lot of characters that are just sort of meh, but there are also a lot of added characters who I really like. So I would say that overall, these additions of Stardew Valley Expanded, Ridgeside, and Scarp are good additions to the game. Anyways, so to recap, I do think those mods add a lot to the game, and so I would recommend using them. One thing though is they are really designed, like the expansion mods, like Expanded, Ridgeside, Scarp. They are really designed with the idea that you are going to start a new run with those mods already installed. They don't really work, as far as I'm aware, if you try to mod them into an already existing run, especially if you don't have like the correct map layout. So I tried to load into a previous file earlier where I didn't have any of those mods, and it just completely breaks the map and basically makes the game unplayable. And so rather than play a whole main run of like 40, 60, 100 hours and then have to do everything all over again with the new mods, I would recommend that you just start with all the expansion mods already in the game on a new run, especially even if it's your first time run. Yes, it'll make it very daunting to try to meet everybody, but I feel that that's a better experience, is to play the game from the start with quality of life mods, aesthetic mods, and expanded content mods already in the game, and just work it out from there. Anyways, just so to briefly recap, I would say get the game, get those expansion mods, get those quality of life mods. If you enjoy games like Minecraft, like Animal Crossing, this is gonna be a game that appeals to you, but it does need significant, like especially quality of life mods to improve the experience. And yes, while you don't technically have to do any specific activity in the game is highly incentivizing and steering you towards doing all of its activities. And once again, I'm not a Stardew Valley expert. I don't have as much experience in the game as, say, dedicated Stardew Valley channels like Selments. I haven't done every single thing in the game. I haven't done perfection. As you can see from like my achievement sheet, I haven't shipped one of everything. I didn't even talk about cooking. Cooking to me felt like a just complete waste of time. Most of the items that you get from cooking are not even worth the ingredients and effort it takes to do the cooking in the first place, especially when just like random items that you can forage will often heal you for more energy and health than even these things do. But yes, I haven't done everything. I haven't filled out every single achievement sheet. I haven't gotten I've gotten, all my skills up to 10, but I've only done Mastery Cave for one of these things. I haven't done all of them. I believe there's supposed to be 12 of these, energy increasing fruits in the game. I only have 4 of them. So I haven't done every single thing, but I feel like this is, 127 hours in, mods. I feel like this is enough experience to generally understand what I'm talking about and to give you a good overview of the game. So quickly, again, these are the mods. I'll have all these relevant mods in the description of the video, so you can take a look at those and just link directly to them if you want. Anyways, that was my take on Stardew Valley. I hope you enjoyed this look. If you are a veteran player of the game and you disagree with me and you think I'm like just totally off about something, let me know, share your thoughts in the comments. If you're a newbie and you thought this video was helpful to you, hope to hear from you as well. I'll see you next time.